to order the Board of Health for our on-site wastewater treatment systems regulation 43 work session at 9:35. So I will start with a roll call. President Barnett, I am here. Vice President Salt.
Here.
Commissioner Geithner.
Here.
Commissioner Nelson.
Here.
Mayor Dixon.
Here.
Councilman Donaldson.
Here.
Dr. Chan.
Here.
Dr. Collins.
Here.
And Mrs. Ralston.
Here.
Okay. I will need a motion and a second on the approval of the agenda for today.
Mayor Dixon also moved.
There's a second?
Courtney Salt, I will second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Are there any comments from the board? Yes. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Are there any public comments for our work session today? I don't see anyone in the room, and we don't have anyone online. Okay, we will now move into today's purpose, which is our work session on Reg 43. So before I turn it over to Kat and Lori, just want to offer some brief comments. So what we're going to work through today is really in preparation for next month's public hearing. So what everyone has had access to and is in front of them is the current state. The point of today is to go through, and we will, one by one. So let's not have a free-for-all. Let's have, I think there's 6 or 9, 7. There's 1 through X number. We'll hit each one at a time. We'll talk about it, and then we will adopt or provide guidance on what we want the new version to be going into next month's public hearing. Great. One last quick thing. So we've known about this since January. We are going to get to an answer by the deadline. It will probably, my sense is, be different than what is currently in black and white on the pages in front of us. And that's okay. If we change something and 3 months from now, it's not going well, or we don't like it, or if we get to 6 months or 12 months, we can revisit and change it back, or change it. So we're doing this because we have to in order for our June deadline. But if we need to change something afterwards, we will revisit it and fix it or change it. Sound good? So let's try to get it right the first time. But if we don't, then we will come back and we can update it at any time. Okay. Any initial process questions for how this is going to work today? Okay. Well, thank you for getting us into work session configuration. This is fun. And we'll go ahead and get started. So, Kat, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm Kat McGarvey, the Environmental Health Division Director for El Paso County Public Health. And so I appreciate the time that everybody has put into this. It's been a prolonged process to get to this point, but it's been super beneficial, and I think we've learned a lot through that process. So kind of what we're going to do today is we're going to go through a little update on where we've been, what we've gone over, and then move into going through each of the optional sections so that we can get to a point that you guys have all the information you need to make an informed and educated decision. So this process for us really started back in October of 2025. And so as of June 2025, CDPHE had their Regulation 43 had become effective June 15th, 2025. And that then started our clock and gave us a year to move towards alignment and adoption with that regulation. In October of 2025, we began a stakeholder process with our industry members. That process, what that looked like was a subset of all of our industry partners came together, worked through the proposed CDPHE red lines, talked through anything that we wanted to propose or move forward with proposal on. And then once we got through that process, we posted any revisions that we made in addition to CDPHEs for public awareness and send an email to all of our industry members, not just the subset. So our entire industry had the ability to provide feedback and input on this at various points from October to January. In January is when we began engaging the board and you as a stakeholder in this process and providing education around the regulations, what the changes are. Much of that is focused on the optional aspects of the regulations, although it should be noted that there are changes within the regulations that are beyond our control and we must adopt regardless of our desired intent. There are sections within the regs that we are required to adopt and be at least as stringent as, but there are sections that are optional. And so the purpose and focus of today will be to go through those optional sections, make sure everybody has their questions answered so that come May, we can make an informed and educated decision. Additional aspects of that timeline include submission of the proposed red line version that we are going to bring for public hearing to CDPHE 30 days prior to our public hearing. So by this Friday, I will have a proposed red line submitted to CDPHE for their preliminary evaluation. That does not mean that anything in that red line cannot change after the public hearing. What that means is just after our public hearing, if there are changes, I will then have to just communicate that to the state. So that's a little bit of the timeline we're under. We do also, by May 4th, have to post in local newspaper notice of the public hearing at least 20 days prior to that public hearing. So by May 4th, we will post in, I believe, the Gazette for that purpose. Questions on timeline before I keep going? Okay. Through this process, I do want to express some gratitude to the board, much in the same way that Deanne expressed gratitude for her position and the processes that we've been through. This process has really allowed us to reflect on our regulations and providing where are we getting our value and what value do we bring to the community through these regulations. And so, 17 months ago, not years, months, when I stepped into this role. This process feels like that, yes, absolutely. 17 months ago when I came into the Environmental Health Division director role, it was really important to me to really go back to what is our core environmental health requirements. Where are our core services? Where is our accountability? What is our core staffing level? And are we operating within the area that we need to operate and not expanding beyond that to get anywhere near undue burden or unnecessary requirements or regulations? And so that is something that is extremely important to me. And through this process, we've been able to align this process in our review through the regulations with that same sentiment. And so I've spent countless hours with Lori Seago in the last couple of weeks and going through what parts of our regulations are really ours to own locally and what parts belong in CDPHE's purview that don't necessarily need to be in ours. And to be fair, there was quite a few of those that for whatever reason have been in our regulations but didn't necessarily need to be. And so we've been able to really go back and look at that and align what is our core need in this and where do we operate compared to where CDPHE operates. And additionally, looking through the regulations, we've really been able to identify areas of low impact and unnecessary burden and remove those as we've gone through this process. So I just want to thank you guys for that because it at times has been very challenging, but it's been very rewarding on the back end too because we've been able to come closer and align in a lot of those aspects. So in front of you and in your binders, you do have several documents that we've prepared at various requests from the board. So you do have a summary of proposed updates. You do have a memo that Lori was gracious enough to put together and share for your awareness. In our overview, we have kind of called out areas of no change, areas of refinement or reduction, and targeted additions or new options. All of these have been done with the intent that we spoke about is what is our core obligation? Where are we getting the most value and impact? And even though we've been doing something for a long time doesn't necessarily mean we need to continue it if it's not providing a value or a service. So I will say there are several areas in the regulations that are super important for us to be able to remain flexible with our community members and avoid that enforcement aspect. And so the reason that we've only had to bring one variance to this board in the 12 years that I've been here is because we have the flexibility through things like property sale, operation and maintenance variant, and different aspects of the variance that are administrative compared to the board having to hear them, that we are able to really work with our property owners to gain the most cost-effective solution for them without having to enforce and require them to come into compliance with something that really doesn't make sense or isn't attainable. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. And then I will ask Lori to kind of guide us through the optional programs a little bit from the legal aspect and help us work through those.
So my intent is to focus on, in this Board of Health work session document that you all have, my intent would be to kind of not even guide the discussion, but to start the discussion in each of the 5 optional areas that the board can consider including or excluding from its final regulation. But before we get there, so all of these are going to be found in what is section 8.4 of our regulation, and section 8.4 is the meat of the administrative and enforcement processes for how public health administers this program. Everything that follows 8.4, for the most part, are all the technical specifications regarding designing various components of the system, maintenance, et cetera. So before we dive into these optional areas within 8.4, for those that have had an opportunity to review the entirety of the regulation, does anyone have any questions about any of those technical standards that are found in 8.5 and beyond? Because there are a lot of changes. They are all mandatory, but if there are questions, I want to make sure that they get addressed by Kat.
Okay, so technical items, you know, something like, as I've been kind of reviewing things, you know, things that pop into my head are, most all the systems are buried. Is that a mandatory thing, technical item, or can they be above ground? You know, most of the tanks are plastic now, and so I can actually envision a lift system into the tank, and then from the tank back into where the cesspool, you know, if they have a cesspool, where the cesspool was. So is an above ground an option?
Yeah. An above-ground system is an option as a soil treatment area, and those are typically called mounds. They are generally 3,000 to 5,000 square feet, and so they can be quite expansive and very large. We don't generally see tanks installed above ground because there is a component. Most of them do gravity flow. There are some that, you know, with plumbing installed in basements, things like that have to be lifted up. But the ground really helps prevent freezing. It helps protect the integrity of the tank because the effluent that is entering the tank, whether it's plastic and or concrete, is highly corrosive and acidic and creates an environment where these break down over time. And so generally they are buried. I don't think there's a specific line in the regulations that says it must be buried. It can be buried up to a certain depth. And so that would be something that we could explore on an individual basis, like through a variance request.
And then another question I had as I'm looking through all this stuff, most of the buried tanks are horizontal. Is there anything that would prevent it from being vertical?
Yes, so the reason that they are built that way is they are 2 compartments, and so that is intended to keep solids on the front end while allowing additional colloidal type organisms and things to settle out in the secondary component of that. And so if they are the other way, then that prevents the gravity flow. So these are really intended to move on demand through without mechanical components.
I can design a system that would go vertical, where everything would come into the bottom, and then we'd have pipes, different pipes. It'd still be 2 chambers.
Sure.
It'd still be like 1-inch pipes coming up through to the second chamber, and as the water level increases, the pressure pushes down, pushes the water up through the other pipes. And so I was curious.
I think there's a lot that goes into that, and you introduce more points of failure by doing that, and unnecessarily in some cases. It doesn't mean that it's not something that we can't potentially explore if that was what we needed to do. But we often see, especially in our climate, the installation of like siphons that use that similar process. They don't function long-term, and they tend to wear out, and you're replacing more and more just given the drastic changes in natures in our climate, and they just don't function well.
But if someone was up against say a hard choice, an even harder choice. There's nothing that would prevent potentially an engineer coming in and saying, here's something that we could do.
You know,
Is that-
outside of not having the tools to be able to monitor and inspect those systems, you know, any design that is submitted, we will evaluate for compliance with
Okay.
the regulations.
Okay, perfect,
Yeah.
thank you.
Go ahead.
Kat and I spoke offline before this meeting. I had some questions about some state requirements that are, such as a grate now has to be installed on a system and, or, you know, if a clean out is not already provided within 5 feet of the outside of a building. I'm not reading all of the detail there, but just, is that in our 8.4 or is that in the other, what?
Those are in
word?
the technical aspects, the 8.5 and beyond.
Okay, so, I guess my question is notification to users, whether it's engineers and installers, and what that will look like to make sure they're aware of these new changes that are coming, whether they're required by state or, you know, whatever we decide today on the optional ones. And you said that, part of the process was getting feedback. So I have a couple of questions there. Could you speak a little bit to, did we get feedback previously? And then going forward, are we going to make sure that people who are interacting with you regularly have an opportunity to be informed before the hearing of here are the changes so that we can get, you know, a good response in the hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. So those are great questions, and we do a lot around connecting and engaging and educating our industry. So we actually hold 2 meetings every year for our industry, and they're industry sector specific. And so everybody in the industry gets notified that these meetings are occurring. They can come and, you know, this is where we align, this is where we work towards understanding and ensure that we are in alignment as we move forward with these. So in our process, in our stakeholder process, that is something that we did discuss. To be fair, I had to retype all 100+ pages of this because a Word document did not exist, and formatting from Adobe to Word was not great. So the most feedback that I got from the community was typos, which not necessarily a lot on the technical aspect. I think we had 7 or 8 total comments through the process that were submitted to us beyond our technical advisory group. And even within our technical advisory group, a lot of them were based on my typos. So
Well, thank you for doing that.
it was needed, and that's okay. But yes, we do have a plan to communicate this. We will, once we move to adoption of our local regulation, hold what we call an OWTS open house that will, for all industry members to come, and we will provide the updates and changes and talk through that and work through what our application of those changes are going to look like.
Okay, great. And just for the record, for the rest of the board, some of these changes that the state is requiring, like a grate, a secondary catch-all on a tank, prevention measure is for new builds. It's not, that was one of my questions that I had offline was, you know, our current septic tank owner is going to have to go and install these things now, and no, it's for new builds, so.
Yeah. Any
Thought
new
I'd
system
share.
installation moving forward would be subject to those, not retroactive.
Yes, that's
Great.
a much better way of saying it, but just thought I would share what I learned.
Great. Dr. Shan?
Do I understand correctly that the technical aspects are not optional, that those are mandated by the state, and we cannot necessarily change that?
In general, that is correct, yes. The requirement is that our regulations be at least as strict as the state's. So if there were some technical component that we felt we could achieve the same outcome with something as strict but in a different way, that is something that we could explore. But otherwise, yes, all of the technical aspects must comply with the state regulation.
Go ahead.
And
Commissioner
so,
Renner.
so is our decision, I mean, our discussion and then also the public hearing primarily to decide on we're basically just deciding which of the optional um, portions we are going to adopt or not adopt. So does that even apply to the technical aspects?
So the ultimate decision will be a motion to approve or disapprove the updates, the proposed updates to Chapter 8, period.
Okay,
And as part
okay.
of that, some of your
Yeah.
decision points along the way will be which of these optional elements to include and in what form.
Which is the purpose of today.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I did not think to ask this prior to today, but yesterday, we were talking through some changes that we were doing in our land development code, it occurred to me, one of the things that I hear most often in the community is, why are you guys changing these things? Why are you making it harder? It's no big surprise that there's oftentimes things that our state does that we don't like, but it is often very difficult for citizens and those who are not involved in the governmental process and who didn't hear all of these discussions to decide or know whether we're doing it because we made that choice or we're doing it because the state is compelling it of us. And so I wonder if there are better ways for us to make that clear in these actual regulations, or just to help, like at the beginning of the chapter, you know, these are created in compliance with state law, you know, whatever, there's no ability, you know, we have no ability locally to change these, or just making it clear, because when people go to read those things, oftentimes, like we see it all the time, like I said, when we were talking about our land development code, this is exactly where I was like, how do we help people know, you can come to me and ask me to change this, or you can be frustrated about this, but I'm not the right point. We're doing what is in compliance, and just making sure they understand who is the regulatory body that is truly in control, that even if we adopt this, we're adopting it under requirement from the state. So if there's any way to make that more clear in the documents themselves, I just think that would go a long way to helping people understand. And the same thing as we get through these optional items, you know, if it is required by the state, somehow denoting that this is required by state law, you know, there's no discretion on this, or something along those lines. Yeah. I think it's also helpful for us, if we ever go and read one of those regulations, that it's clear there in front of us. You know, though I definitely think Ms. Seago has plenty of job security, because there will always be many legal issues, particularly in our state, that we are always trying to figure out. It also means that we immediately will know that even in the future as we are looking at any of these things. And so rather than having to go to Ms. Seago and say, is this required by the state, or is this something that's optional? It'll be right there for us all to see, and hopefully that helps us.
Perhaps in the upfront pages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can certainly connect with Lori and we can talk through what that might look like. I know you had previously requested something along those lines in one of the previous meetings, and so that's where I structured the changes document. Although this is specific to the changes right now, it would be easy to take that and make it, you know, kind of section based, and at Lori's Lori's guidance and discretion of how we put that into a regulation or add as an appendix or a supplemental.
Exactly. Initially, I was just thinking for our knowledge, but the more, like I said, really yesterday, when we were talking about our land development code, and we were talking, you know, we heard commissioners asking questions like, well, do we have to do that? We don't really like that. Well, we have to do that because the state is requiring us. So I know we're asking those questions, and quite frankly, I've started to get those questions around OWTS too, and again, just making that clear. And so rather than just having it internally, I think if we can put it directly on the pages, it just helps everyone understand, and they won't come to us and ask us to change things that we have no control over.
Sure, and I appreciate that, because one of the biggest struggles that we do face is education of our community and the importance of why the rules exist in the form that they do, but also that they do exist. And that is one of the biggest struggles that we have routinely. And we spend a lot of time, you know, even in our property sale process, helping folks navigate, well, is this impactful to my system that I need to change or remediate it? Or is this something that I should just pay attention to? And so we spend a lot of time educating the public and engaging with the public and helping them understand the difference, where our industry members, we don't regulate in their ethics or their business practices, right? We just regulate in what they can and cannot do with respect to the regulations. And so, but that does vary. And we will get in industry members who will say, oh, this system is wholly unacceptable and we need to replace the whole thing, where that may not necessarily be the case. And so the flexibility we have in that and being part of that discussion is huge for our community, absolutely.
Go ahead, Mayor Dixon.
Could you touch on the Blackwater, Graywater item that us three had kind of touched on Friday, and the restrictions maybe at the county level? Is that right?
So as far as like composting and incinerating toilets,
No, I
or
mean
just the
like
separation?
Separation,
Yeah.
Blackwater, Graywater?
Yeah, so our regulations as currently written do not allow for system sizing reductions if we separate out gray water compared to black water. And black water mainly being like toilet waste, things with organic matter in it, and gray water being things like your washing machine, your dishwasher, sinks, showers, things like that. And so I know our county is opted out of the gray water regulations currently because there's a separate regulation for gray water. We are working through a process to define or identify or clarify value that may come with something like that. But in regard to our regulations in OWTS, there is no ability to separate those flows. And if you do separate, if all of your gray water goes to one system and your black water goes to another, it doesn't give you any system sizing reductions to do that at this point. So, it all has, the system sizing is based on the totality of the wastewater, regardless of color.
And I'll just add that, for whatever reason that I don't fully understand, the ability and the authority to adopt gray water regulations allowing for the separation, not the design aspect in the OWTS regs, but the ability to separate out and reuse your gray water is within the purview of the county, not the Board of Health or El Paso County Public Health. So the county at the end of last year did adopt a resolution prohibiting the use of gray water, with the understanding that we were going to examine the issue and see if there is value in pursuing that program. In my conversations with Kat, we agreed that we wanted to get through this first, and then we'll turn our attention to gray water and see if that's something that the county, on its side, would like to explore.
Go ahead, please.
So a little bit of color to that. So I appreciate that explanation. So for everyone's awareness, yeah, there's all kinds of weird things that pop up, it seems. But it used to be, prior to the state in their infinite wisdom passing yet another law that made us, jump through hoops, that it was prohibited unless the county opted in. And we've talked about that over the years, but there's a lot of components. We have to work with public health. We have to work with regional building, because then now they have to inspect totally different systems, right? And so it is not an easy thing. So this law change that basically said, oh no, we're actually gonna allow people to do it unless you say you're not allowing them. And so we were faced up against a deadline that was going to say, now people are allowed, and we had no system in place. So we adopted to say no, but also made very clear we are very open to having these conversations. It's just we can't put the cart before the horse. So I think that those conversations can certainly continue. And in theory, we're supportive of people, saving water, using gray water, those type of things. But I'm also going to add, it's so interesting because it's a good reminder for us all in policy making. You make one decision and it affects so many other things. So, for example, when Commissioner Nelson and I went out with Kat and we were looking at some of these systems, and we were even talking about, we've had this change to low flow, showers and faucets and all of these things. And great, we're conserving water. Well, awesome. What that means is you are no longer diluting as much your septic if you have a septic system. And so you're actually creating another problem downstream from that. So again, it's just the nature of policy making. You fix one thing, break something else. And it's just a really good reminder about how carefully we do want to take these, which is why I really appreciate the process that we've had here. But so that's still on our radar. And I think, we will continue to work with the partners, and we want to get to again, both the most flexibility, but yeah, we all know that we are in a water-constrained environment. And so if there are ways for us to create the ability for people to create those kind of systems, I don't think there's a ton of demand for that right now. But I know that I've talked to a few people over the years, especially out in the Far East, who are interested in, you know, really, this is a 1 and 2 off. It's not like a major development. But then there are some that would like to use, you know, gray water in some regard. So we will keep working on that.
Do we
Anything
want
else? Okay.
to move on from the technical mandatory chapter? I think that was chapter 5, right? Or
Five-
section 5?
5
Yeah.
and
Five
to
and
the
beyond.
end. Yeah. Okay.
So now we're going to move into the optional.
Yes.
Okay. Is there, is there a page we should be on that you prefer? I've been looking at page
It's up to you.
3.
If you want to be in the reg itself, it starts on,
Let's, instead of going into the document itself,
yep,
can we go to section 2, page 3? And go the 1 through, what is that, 1 through 9? Or, sorry, 6. I was right the first time, 1 through 6. I don't want to throw you off either. I've just been that's what I've been anchoring to, but whatever,
okay.
and whatever folks have been anchored onto. Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah.
So if we're in section 2, page 3,
Mhm.
and all of these can be found in 8.4 in our regulation, which again is the meat of the administration of this program.
Mhm.
So the first option that the board has is whether or not to allow for variances to those technical requirements. And, you know, variances allow for a property owner to come in and say that this, you know, the way that a conventional system that meets these standards doesn't work because of X, I'd like to do it this way. I feel like that provides the same amount of protection for the environment and public health. And so this is what I'd like to do. And so I apologize, I wasn't really prepared to speak on that, so that's why I'm sort of flailing here, because we did touch on that in the executive session as well.
Mhm.
So what it is a request to vary from the design and siting requirements that may pose an undue burden or hardship specific to the property at issue. The ability.
Is this the slide that we have? I'm sorry, I see that you're.
That's
reading off
okay.
of a
This is my
slide.
executive session
Oh,
slide, so,
okay.
yeah, so it was not
Okay, I was just gonna
provided, sorry.
suggest it be put up there, but I didn't.
Let's see if it's in my memo.
Yeah, I think
You
the
could
information
also
on there, in here is,
Yeah, you could also
What we need.
refer to my memo, which is
Yeah.
in section 1.
Mhm.
Page 2 talks about variances.
Yep.
So there are specific criteria that the state has set when considering whether to grant a variance. It's important to note that you would not have the authority to grant a variance based solely on economic benefit or cost savings for the property owner. You also cannot grant variances in certain circumstances, and those circumstances are reductions in the requirements for soil treatment areas, reductions in vertical separation distances, or in horizontal separation distances, unless you also choose to adopt the operations and maintenance provisions in the regulation. So that's an optional portion as well, but it is required if you want to be able to adopt variances.
okay, Councilman, go ahead, and then we'll go to,
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is on. And we currently allow variances, right? That's currently the way we do it. Kat, do you recommend any changes to that?
I would not recommend changing and moving away from variances.
Okay. And then this might be an easy one. If you don't recommend changes, we currently do it. I would just ask, is there anyone opposed to continuing with our current?
so I
Policy.
think that's where we're all leaning. Let's just have a quick discussion, and then I would love that question for each one of these. Let's just go one by one. But yes, I would hope this is the easiest one, but let's hear out everyone, and then we can get to that. Go ahead.
I was just going to, say something similar. I think we obviously want maximum flexibility, and I think this is one we probably mostly all agree on, so.
I agree. Mayor Dixon?
Considering that my whole community would probably need a variance, yes,
Yes.
please.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? Lori, do we just need to like nod some heads, direction, consensus?
We don't need a vote. If we want to include it, and then there are no changes to the actual verbiage in the regulation itself that you'd like to see,
Okay.
then that's what we need to hear, and we won't change the draft in that area.
Okay. I'm seeing all head nods, so we will keep it as is per your recommendation. And let's move on to the second one, property transfer title program.
With your permission, Mr. President, I'd like to skip that because I think that's going to engender a lot of discussion. If we could maybe take the low-hanging fruit first.
I'm fine with that because I would agree.
Can I
where
suggest
do
that
we
we
wanna go?
actually do the operations and maintenance one that
Yes.
is tied specifically to the one that
That's
we
a great
just-
idea because of the pairing. Yes, so that would be, I think, the last one on here. So it's number 6 on page 8, and we're still in the section 2.
Correct.
Okay, go ahead.
The operations and maintenance program is currently in effect under our current regulations. We do have requirements regarding the required scheduling of inspections. And
I can't hear Lori.
How about now? Maybe
Yes.
I've been doing my mic wrong. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Been doing it wrong this whole time. So the operations and maintenance requirements apply to any system that has advanced treatment units or has pressure distribution. They do not apply to your conventional OWTS. The requirements are for inspection and maintenance and record keeping. We also certify the O&M specialists that do those inspection and maintenance functions. And again, this element is required if you want to grant variances in those areas I identified earlier.
Question, do we publish online, the people who have the certifications?
We do. So we
Okay.
maintain a list of all of our approved operation and maintenance service providers, and that does include their specific certifications to service higher level treatment systems as well.
Okay, so we don't need any change in this to,
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
My only question would be for Kat, do you recommend any changes to our current language?
I do not. This is one of the areas that does grant us a large amount of flexibility. It does give us the ability to work creatively and find creative solutions to a lot of the concerns. In this, also, I know there may be a concern for the extension of government and overburden of over-regulating. I would like to share with you a recent example where an application was submitted. It was designed as a pressure distribution system. Upon our review, we could not identify a reason for it to be designed as pressure distribution. So we were able to engage with that homeowner and notify them that this system would require operation and maintenance, which elicited a good conversation. And ultimately, we can move that homeowner into a conventional system. The designer was not overly thrilled with that, but that is part of our role too, is to serve the community and make sure that they are not getting a system that's going to unintentionally put them into something that they don't need to be in as well. And so conventional systems are those as gravity fed and or pump to gravity or dosed. So even if it may have a pump, that doesn't automatically mean that it's placed into this. So there are very specific situations that we review and do take seriously our ability to connect with the community and ensure they have an understanding of what they're doing.
You want to go? Okay, Dr. Chan, go ahead.
I just want to make sure I understand. Are variances only allowed if we also adopt the O&M? Or can we allow variances without adopting O&M requirements?
So if you don't adopt O&M requirements, there are 3 types of variance that you would not be allowed to grant. And that is a reduction in the size of the soil treatment area, a reduction in the horizontal distance requirements and a reduction in the vertical distance requirements when it comes to designing and placing your system.
Yeah.
Okay, and so are those three elements frequent elements that are requested as variances?
These are three of the highest number of designs and reasons for designs. We have a very high groundwater table. We have bedrock consistently. We have rock content throughout the county, and in addition to small lot sizes and constraints on the site. And so these are hugely important for us to be able to be flexible and work with homeowners to be able to fit systems on properties appropriately.
And O&M, it only applies to engineered systems, right?
The pressure distribution and higher level treatment systems are required to be designed by engineers.
Okay, they're required to be designed by engineers, but what about the operations and maintenance requirement?
Yes, so if it's designed as pressure distribution or higher level treatment, then it is required, it would have an operation and maintenance requirement.
And that
Okay, and-
operations and maintenance would need to be performed by a licensed O&M specialist.
And so so how burdensome would it be if the homeowner wanted to be licensed themselves? Is it difficult for the homeowner to become licensed and perform their own operations and maintenance certification?
Sure, so while we don't necessarily encourage or recommend that because of the nature of the system and the technical aspects, anybody within our community is able to take the courses necessary to become certified and licensed in order to perform this. So we do not restrict or limit, they just have to meet the requirements to become a certified operation and maintenance service provider.
And how much is the fee currently for an O&M inspection?
Those inspection fees are all set by the business owners. We don't regulate the fees for that. On average, my understanding of an operation and maintenance inspection can be anywhere from $500 to $1,000 on an annual basis, and that's going to depend on the technical aspects of the system, how long it's going to take in the construction of the system, meaning how often the inspector has to walk back and forth. There's a lot that goes into that, but those are all set by third-party inspectors.
Okay, so in, say, a 20-year period, if somebody is in their home for 20 years or possibly longer, I guess what you're looking at is adding something in the ballpark of $20,000 to the cost of their system, and that is assuming that there is no additional inflation on labor costs.
And under the method, $1,000 per inspection annually, that is true. However, in comparison to having to install an entirely new system at $60,000+ to be able to maintain the initial investment, it aligns with like a sewer service fee for those who are on central sanitation. But the investment to maintain that system and keep it operating is smaller compared to having to constantly reinstall a system.
And so is O&M, is there any leeway where O&M can be done every, say, 2 years or 3 years instead of yearly? How was that annual inspection arrived at? Is there evidence that without an annual inspection, there is a higher failure rate?
So this is actually something that we did talk about in our technical advisory group. And the requirements that are set where after system installation, you are inspected on 6-month intervals for the first year and then annually thereafter. That is within if you adopt this section of the regulations, that is requirement of the state as you adopt it. However, we did have discussion about this in our technical advisory group, and there was some option for maybe moving to a 2-year inspection, but the majority of our industry had came back to annual is the most ideal because you're talking, a 5 30 seconds hole that is in the pressure pipe. So the pipe is perforated, it's got a really tiny hole in it. They do clog over time. Many people who live on an on-site system are not always familiar with the use and the intended use of it and may misuse that system. And this allows us to be able to keep them on an annual basis, making sure that that system functions long-term and operates as intended. And right now, our inspections are showing that there's a need for that. So as we become more well-versed in this and people become more educated, our community becomes more educated around it, that is something we're looking to, in the future, look at is advocating for extending the timeframes for inspections.
Okay, so I don't think that I understand that answered my question. Does 43 allow for a longer period of time between inspections? And secondly, is there evidence that annual versus a longer period, that annual is required in order to maintain the system?
So even though the O&M element is optional, the state has established minimum standards for this element, and one of those minimum standards is that for higher level treatment systems, you must require 2 inspections at 6-month intervals for the first year of operation, followed by annual inspections for the life of the system.
Okay, so if we adopt O&M, there's no point in even discussing the interval of inspection because we can't change that.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's open it to Commissioner Geithner and folks in the room. Go ahead.
I just want to say that Kat just did a great job, I think, of answering all of those questions. And where my thinking was on this, it creates the most flexibility for our community. And while I agree, I think, I want to save folks money, and I hate to impose those. The alternative is much more. And so it makes sense to me to provide the most flexibility in this. And I think maybe what I was hearing when you talked to the team about maybe there would be some advocacy at some point. Maybe that's advocacy with the state at a later date, not within these regulations and how we're discussing today, but advocacy with the state to maybe move to that in the future so that we can proactively look to advocate for our community and possibly bring some of those costs down. So I will say, I think this is a no-brainer for us, along with the variance, to provide the most flexibility. And I think they're great questions about what the state requires, but within what we have, I think this one makes a lot of sense.
Okay. And just to confirm, Kat, you agree?
I do agree, yes. And
Okay.
I was talking about, as our part in the stakeholder group at Reg Revisions is advocating for longer inspection times, once we have a better understanding that we can do that.
Okay. So I think we can, go
And
ahead.
I would reiterate, because I am in a challenging area, anything that can open up more
Yeah.
options without having to go through and have us try to spend $30 million to try to get a main sewer line down to CSU. Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of anything that opens up options.
Okay. Especially paired with the variance, it makes the most sense. So I think we're aligned. Some head nods. Okay, so Kat, we will keep this one as is, and we'll move on.
All right, I'd like to move on next to contractor licensing, which is in your section 2 at the top of page 6. So we currently do license OWTS contractors, and those are the folks that either install or repair your OWTS. If you are the property owner and your system is not engineered, if it's a conventional system, you don't have to be licensed to install it. I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's pretty much all I had on that one.
And Kat, maybe we'll just do that. Laura, go, then you go. Let's a little commentary.
I would recommend keeping this as is, yes.
Okay. Open it up for discussion.
Could I just ask
yeah, go
Kat to expand on why would you say that, Kat? Go ahead.
Yeah, so having a minimum standard for our community to expect from their licensed contractors is as close to consistency as we can get in something that is very perceptive in nature. And so creating a minimum standard allows us to be able to speak to the community and reassure them that there are standards that have to be met in order to be able to do this work. And so we do, absent of having licensure, what we have noticed is, and in homeowner installs, we end up going back to sites 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And that, at 2 hours per trip generally, that's a lot of time we're not getting permits out. That's a lot of time that we're not able to respond to the community. So having a minimum standard and a minimum expectation and a minimum understanding of our regulations eliminates some of that aspect and allows us to focus our energy where it's most necessary.
And you would expect to see more of that if this was removed? You would see
Yep, that we would be spending
professional
much more
installers.
time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead.
When you do those visits, are they charged for all of those additional visits?
Correct. So if they pull up brand new construction, so the structure's never been built, we do include one additional reinspection fee in those permits. However, anything beyond that is billed at $338 per return trip fee to account for travel time, mileage, and cost.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So generally speaking, I'm against licensing with everything. And here's my reason why. It gives the public a false sense that they are coming to someone who's going to do a good job. And that's not always true that we find in licensing. And that's in licensing anything. I'm not as concerned about this one because it's been operating this way, but I'll be frank and say I am always much more in favor of a optional type program where you can get a licensed person. That if we offered licensing but it wasn't required, for example, then those companies in the free market can go to customers and say, hey, I'm licensed. Let me explain why it makes a better decision, and it puts that decision on the consumer. They're going to be paying for those costs. Understanding we might have to hire another person if that was a huge thing, but ultimately those costs are borne by the decision maker itself. And so it's not a strain on, taxpayers in the same way that something else might be. So like I said, it could be an optional program. I'm always more in favor of that. And I find that that's kind of in alignment with everything that you see in the free market, where essentially you have the opportunity to choose that person, and it's based more on reputation and the work. I'll just give you an example. I had my house painted last year, and painters aren't licensed, right? But I got 3 quotes, and I asked a lot of important questions about the quality of paint that they use. I asked a lot of questions about how they deal with issues and how they were going to deal with dissatisfaction. And that's a process, but it's also important. If there was a licensure for painting, which would be silly, but if there was, I might just think that they were all the same. So I don't love that it creates a false sense either of that. And I don't generally think that there's a huge proper role of government to do a lot of consumer protection. There are times and places for a lot of things, but if we're protecting their expenses, that's kind of on them to make those. What it also opens up is the potential for people who are just getting into that. They may be able to do things and operate at a lower cost and still do a fine job. They're going to find out really quickly if they have to spend a lot of money on inspections, it makes sense to come in and do a licensure and then use that in their marketing. So again, this is not one that I feel super, that is a big deal that we shouldn't have it, if I'm being quite frank. But generally, that's my feeling on licensure, that especially in this situations, it doesn't necessarily do as much as I think we tend to think it does.
Kat, this one's been in force since, is this the 2014 one?
As I only have regulations as far back as 2014. Prior to that, I could not answer if it was in that.
Okay.
However, I do think that absence of licensure may impact the installation, because licensure is tied to installation of engineered systems. And so there may be an impact there that I would have to explore with Lori, because there are specific systems that require a licensed installer to install them. And that, I believe, is a state mandated technical aspect.
So I would just say, obviously, we wouldn't want to put those at risk, for sure. And like I said, this is, I mean, if there's no strong
Yeah.
feelings on this, this is not one that I'm, going to die on this hill. It's not the end of the world. It's already been. I would be more worried about ones that we are implementing in it from a new perspective. But I wouldn't want to, if it does jeopardize that in any way, it's certainly not something I would even consider.
Okay. We'll go to Dr. Chan and then to Lauren. Okay, Dr. Chan, go ahead.
Okay, so here we're talking about contractors or installers. There's also the design aspect, where in an engineered system, usually the contractor is not the designer. Is that right?
So we do, a couple items down on our list, we will be talking about the proposal to certify designers as well. But this specific topic, the licensing of the contractor, is not that. It's just for those who install or repair the systems.
Okay, and so for a system that is just your standard system, that is not an engineered system, do those require a licensed installer if it's not the homeowner?
Yes, so it has to be either the homeowner or a licensed installer as currently written.
Okay, and if a homeowner is doing a DIY system, to some degree, I feel like in certain circumstances, the Department of Health becomes the de facto actual designer, not the contractor or installer. At how many visits does it become the same cost as actually hiring a contractor? And with the fees that are associated with the visits, does that cover the entire cost to the department of repeat follow-ups?
Sure. So I don't think I can answer all of your question, because I don't have data to demonstrate how many visits it would take to equal the cost for an installer to install a system. That's not, we don't dabble in or regulate cost of installation, so I don't have that data. However, what I will tell you is that we do spend substantially more time on homeowner installations, and so in our fee revision, we had introduced a surcharge for homeowner installs after a 2-year period of trial, where we were doing pre-construction meetings with homeowners that take generally 2.5 to 3 hours with the homeowner. They walk us through what they're going to do on their system, and we talk to them about the regulations, because in our regulations, they have an obligation to demonstrate competency to be able to install the system. And so we did a two-year trial pilot period where we did these without a charge. And what we found is we went from 5 to 8 re-inspections to getting it right on the first time, and or maybe a second inspection. And so now this is one of the programs, for everybody's awareness, where statutorily we can recover both the indirect and the direct costs. So this is a program where we can fully recover the costs of all the work that we do. So that's where the homeowner surcharge came in, is the evaluation of how much time it was taking and the value to the homeowner to not pay that, extra $1,000 on the back end for return inspections to be able to get that right, where we do the education and the work on the front end for a smaller fee, and that leads to them being able to get that right. So while I can't tell you how many visits it would take to equate, we generally do talk to our homeowner installers to let them know that it is generally more cost effective to go with a licensed installer who has been doing this for a substantial period of time and understands and knows the regulations. But we will not ever tell a homeowner we won't work with them to be able to do that. And we find the most practical way possible to do that while also still covering our costs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm curious as to what the mechanism is for, are we not granting a permit if it's not demonstrated that the installer is certified? Or how are we, like, coming back to the point of optional versus it's a requirement currently that installers have to be certified through us. So can you just speak to what that looks like?
Sure. So right now, the way that the process looks is either the homeowner submits the application for homeowner installs, or the licensed installer submits the application for licensed installer installs. So that's how we're verifying that on the front end. If in the past we've had GCs try to submit the application, those are generally a mess and take a substantial period of time for us to get into compliance before we can even process it with all the right documents. And so that's where we went to the licensed installer submitting, because they have that required knowledge and education. And so they do have to name that person on the front end of that. Doesn't mean that they can't change it. So we have a change process too, where they can communicate a change after the permit's been issued.
And I guess kind of this was asked earlier on a separate topic, but do we have a list on our website of here are the licensed installers in the area, or are we expecting the installers to advertise we're licensed by the Department of Health?
Yeah. No, we do maintain the list on our website. It is randomized monthly because we have about 75 licensed installers. And so back when they were posted as PDFs and not web pages, many people were not getting to that third and fourth page. And so through conversation with our industry, we moved to a randomized and not alphabetized list. So they are listed on our website. The installers are also required to have certification in the higher level treatment systems if they are going to install those. So that is also labeled on our list as well.
So with the process of becoming certified, is it they are taking a test every year proving that they understand what the regulations and requirements are? And then what is the frequency that we're requiring them to renew their licenses? Is it once you've established you are approved, then you're good to go for forever, and we just expect that they are checking back if there's, like in this case, there's new requirements coming from the state?
So the licenses are valid for 2 years from the date of issue.
And is that a state requirement, or is that us deciding how long?
To be fair, I don't know if I can tell you that off the top of my head.
Okay.
Lori might be able to
I
add to
can.
that.
There are no, I hate to say no, there are very few, if any, minimum requirements for licensing of contractors. The authority given to us is simply that we have the authority to license contractors. So the requirements that we impose are at the local level.
Okay.
So, and that they have been in our regulations since the 2014 version, that we do this on an every 2-year basis. However, what we did 2 years ago with our fees is, because they used to be charged the same fee, whether it was a brand new application and you're taking the test, or you're renewing with continuing education credits, is we reduced the renewal fee with continuing education credits. Now, if they are renewing by coming in and re-exam and retaking the test, because that is an option, they can either submit renewals credits, or they can come retest. They still have to pay the higher fee because of the cost associated with administering that test. The test that they do take is the Part A exam. It is recognized across the state as a whole. So what that means is that if they take the test here in El Paso County and then they want to get licensed in another county that also recognizes the Part A, they do not have to retake. They just have to pay whatever fee to become licensed in that county, and vice versa for us.
Are we taking on risk as the department that if someone claims, or they went through our process to become certified and then they totally botch installation, are we taking on liability in that we get granted them certification? Like we said, you have credentials.
I don't believe we are, no.
Okay.
Not to say we wouldn't get sued, but I don't think that we would be found liable for that.
Okay.
And is the inverse of that true? I don't think that's what you asked. So if we were to change and said no more licensing, and someone said they were and they weren't, and something happened.
I don't believe we would be found liable.
Lots of ifs, I know.
And I would just add to that, all of our, because we've been so successful with the pre-construction meetings with the homeowners, and our newer installers, newer licensed installers tend to struggle through initially. We have also now established a pre-construction meeting with our newly licensed installers to avoid some of that concern if they totally botched the install. So we are partnering with them and working with them to make sure that they have a minimum base level competency.
Go ahead, and then we'll go to you, Mary Dixon.
Yeah, I appreciate this discussion, and I want to bring into the discussion some of the similarities between what happens with permitting here and regional building, since I also serve on regional building. One of the things that we've talked about with contractors, and we are required to license all kinds of things at regional building. But one of the things that we've done over there that I think is worthy of consideration is that there's an automatic licensing program over there where if you are in good standing and there are not complaints and you're not having problems processing your permits, there are no issues with your interaction with regional building, then you get an automatic renewal. And it saves everyone time and money, including the department, because we're not having to process. Because that's the other thing that I think that we're not talking about here is us processing and keeping track of all of these licensures does cost us something, right, in time. And so there's also a potential for looking at a, innovative program, I think, if we want to have the licensure, that does something similar, which, again, what I'd like to see is more encourage people to get there. When they see that there is value to their business in doing this, they're going to do it. When all of a sudden you're listing the optional licensed folks, if we were to go that route, and they're not on that list, boy, they're going to figure out how to get on that list really quickly. The market will, I really think, correct a lot of this. But again, even if we wanted to keep a permanent licensure, I would recommend that we look for some sort of program that, rather than a 2-year, that we purely create a system that allows us to catch the problem children, so to speak, and not burden everyone else. And in that, I think regional building also does, and Todd and I serve on this together, so we're co-conspirators in the regional building work, but also something that is done there, in addition to that, automatic renewal process, is that they do exactly what you're talking about. So I think that's a great parallel. Whereas if we have some new regulations, boy, we're going to do a class on it, and we're going to tell you, installers, this is new, and we're inviting you to come and learn about it, and make sure, rather than a forceful, we're going to put this in a certification 2 years down the road, that we're just being good partners and communicating. It sounds like that's already happening, so it makes me kind of think parts of these are already in place that we could look at potentially one of those options if the board was open to those.
Go ahead, Mary Dixon.
If someone's just installing a vault, and that a vault is where just you have basically a plastic tank and it fills up and you have to pump it out, are there a lot of technical requirements on that? Because what I'm contemplating is, okay, if it's a super simple type of system, would it be an option then for someone to just not necessarily have to go through the licensing? I would personally agree with anything that involves soils, that we probably ought to have someone that's licensed. But if it's just a vault, and I'm kind of looking to you for, do we have issues with vaults?
We do see some issues with tank installations, specifically in areas where we have high groundwater and groundwater tables, because there are anchoring requirements that come with that, and the specificity around those also require engineering to be involved. However, to your point, generally, if somebody is just installing a tank, we do see a high number of homeowner installs on that, which don't require licensing.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Mayor Dixon, what are your thoughts? How are you thinking about this one?
My thoughts, I tend to, where I'm at is, there's enough complication, especially in anything that involves soils, and if there's anchoring in high groundwater, a certification is something that is basically signals that, yes, you understand the basic requirements and what's needed to comply with the requirements. And so I kind of tend to look at it from a perspective of, okay, what's needed to comply, and how do we actually, demonstrate that the people who are doing the work have the knowledge and background that they need. I get the licensing concern, with having the optional system. But, I mean, these things get into flows, they get into soils, and if you kind of mess up on any of those, you can basically have a non-compliant system. And so I tend to lean more towards having licensed people do things.
Okay, go ahead.
What do you think about something like the system that we have at Regional Building that is like an automatic licensure for those that
Oh, yeah,
are continuing?
if people if they're in what we call good standing.
Yeah.
And have demonstrated abilities, automatic licensure, where you haven't had any issues with them, launch.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
And yeah, I mean, what do you see upside practically to that?
And this is something that we have talked about in a lot of ways, is how do we develop like a good standing list? Because we cannot quote unquote recommend. But if we can establish some sort of criteria, and to be fair, going through all these processes and trying to make sure we're really realigned, we haven't been able to focus dedicated energy to that. My concern would be technologies change, soils change. We have lots of the impact, to Mayor Dixon's point, of if you're not educated on those things, it can become disastrous for a homeowner very quickly. So I'd like to still maintain some aspect of continuing education. So if that maybe looks like under a new regulation, everybody has to submit CEUs or come to a meeting, and it's a mandatory thing, and then they can be licensed indefinitely through that regulation until the next change. Like, I'm all for that. My question to the board would be, is there a way, and are you supportive of us developing a list of like the A list, for lack of a better term right now, where in the past boards have not always been supportive of us identifying those in a way that it looks like we're supporting specific industry members.
I don't think that's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting is you initially get your license and you have gone through the hoops. And then you have a process by which it's like, listen, if you don't have any complaints or you haven't had any issues with us going through the processes where you've created some sort of, either generated a complaint, you could come up with a list, but generated a complaint, had so many re-inspections, but you've created some criteria around that. And sure, by the way, and you have come to an annual meeting of updates of whatever, then we're no longer going to require you to go through anything additional at this point. Your license remains current as long as you meet these requirements, rather than resubmitting and going through a new process every 2 years. Does that make sense? So there wouldn't be an A list, B list. It's purely just license, and in what we're saying, everyone has to be licensed, but it just changes how that licensing process happens. So rather than every 2 years, everyone's got to resubmit, basically it's an automatic renewal, and you always remain licensed as long as you meet these requirements. Because I think it would reduce your workload at the end of the day, because all you'd have to track is whether or not they were out of compliance, and then send a letter and say, you have not met our annual renewal or automatic renewal, so, please know that you will have to renew it 2 years. And what we have found at Regional Building is almost no one has to be renewed manually, because they all know it's really super simple, and this is one less thing that I have to do, and it just has worked really well.
Creates a new incentive. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could borrow what we do in the FAA, we have a designation program. We designate individuals, we designate companies. We have an annual renewal process. And the ones that come in and have demonstrated abilities, and yes, we did have annual training that was required. But the ones that have basically demonstrated abilities, their annual renewal took a very short time. It was like, okay, here you go, knock yourself out, keep doing good. Our problem, children, took a lot longer. And in some cases, we had to remove their designations. And so it's actually, the timeliness actually came in through the actual renewal process versus, just a cut and dried type of thing. And so that may be another potential option, is the renewal process actually gets to be a very short time versus if you have a problem child, then, okay, you're having to oversee them. And if you're continually having to oversee them, then maybe you remove the license.
Dr. Collins, go ahead.
I hate to take this opportunity to opine, to only ask for temporary leave of absence. I have an expert witness case that they've been bugging me about that I need to attend. I didn't think this was going to go on, and they've been pulling back the time that they want me to be in
Okay.
court. So I'll follow along remotely.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anything else? Oh, go ahead.
I'm just going to play devil's advocate. I definitely lean towards a more of an optional and government being less involved. But to play devil's advocate, it will still require our department to be tracking people. And if they, they're still going to have to track whether there's been X number of failed inspections to then say, no, you have to go back through the process to be recertified. And so I'm just wrestling with, does it gain us anything to move to this sort of a system, or is it still going to be work on our department? And does it actually almost put more work on our department because they're the ones having to track it rather than putting it on the individuals to say, I need to go out and do my due diligence to get recertified? Or is there a way that, the automatic renewal occurs as long as people do their part of making sure they're staying up to date on codes, and it not being our department having to track, did this person follow all of the steps necessary? So just sharing to play devil's advocate. I don't know where I'm landing yet.
If we wanted to include the automatic renewal language, what does that look like? Do we just say we want it to happen, and then you propose the specific language for next time?
Yes,
or
I
do we
would
need to come
recommend
with
that
it
you
now?
give us that instruction, and Kat and I will work together to draft some language, and we can distribute it prior to the public hearing, and then present it and have further discussion at the public hearing and see if you like it or not.
Okay.
Lori, does
Any
the
more?
state, does
Oh,
the
go ahead.
state constrain the periodicity of license renewal at all?
No.
Okay.
What was the question? I didn't.
Whether or not the state constrains the periodicity of license renewal?
Okay. Go ahead, Dave.
Can I add, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll also have to leave start before 11:30 and ideally at 11, but I'll hang around as long as I can.
Okay.
We haven't heard what how long the licensing takes. I'd be interested in that. Is it a one-day class? Is it, how many hours? And also the renewal, you mentioned they can do it by just continuing education. Sounds like maybe submit that and they just get automatically renewed. And can you talk about I know this is very similar to paramedics or others who, you can do continuing education in the interim, and then like at year 6, you have to actually take a test. It's kind of like that. How much education is there? Because when you're just doing the job, what happens is you just do what you were taught originally. When you come in for these kind of trainings, you're made aware of new things, new technologies, new standards. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, so specific to installer licenses, it's just the requirement to take and pass the exam. It is an open book exam, and they only have to get 75 on it to pass. So they schedule a time with us, they come in, they can take however long they want. We have a camera system set up, so we're watching them as they examine, proctoring that exam. Then the continuing education units, most of our industry are also certified service providers and certified inspectors. So there is a national requirement that they have to recertify through that national organization. And so generally, they're consistently retaking those courses on a consistent basis anyway. So we're not asking somebody to go out of their way to do that. We do struggle to get the people who need to be here for the information that they need to have. So, naturally, in the list of any industry, there's top, middle, bottom kind of structure that they shake out into. And where we struggle and get the education pieces, the people who should be in the rooms aren't always coming to those. And so that's part of the struggle with that too. And ensuring that people understand the changes and making sure that they get that information, because they also don't always read the information that we share with them.
Okay.
So
Mrs.
has
Ralston.
there been any pushback from the contractors with the policy that we currently have?
No, I've received no feedback on the structure. They appreciate the reduced fee for the renewal aspect of that. But as far as I'm aware, I've not received anything from anybody for licensing.
Then they may appreciate the automatic renewal that we've been discussing.
Yeah,
So-
I'm definitely willing to explore that,
Yeah.
and I will put some, right now, I couldn't tell you what that might look like, and to Commissioner Nelson's point, I also fear that maybe tracking every single person at the total of 130-ish certifications and licenses in our county may be more burdensome than what we have now for our staff, and at least the initial lift of and cost of changing our system to be able to do that.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to say, regional building has found the exact opposite, that it's actually saved us money. We haven't raised fees in like 20 years. We have the lowest fees in all of the state of Colorado for almost everything that we do over there. And so I get that there may be some initial upfront work, but I mean, I can think of 5 different ways that this could not be an extra burden. I mean, if you are tracking and making sure everyone's certification is coming in, and all of a sudden, you don't even have to do that for 75% of people unless there was a red flag placed on theirs. And it's very easy to just place a red flag on somebody and then sort a spreadsheet, for goodness sakes. Or there are other types of, tracking systems and things that are out there. So I get it, but I think, government's tendency is to be worried about, and I get it, and I hear what you're saying about like timing and all of those things, but our job is to serve these people. It is to make our lives harder and their lives easier, actually. That is what we should be doing, is how can we take on more of this and make their lives easy, because they're paying us to do it. It's not like we're, volunteering, well, some of us are volunteering our time here. Sorry about that. But from a staff perspective, like that's that customer service focus that I think is really important. And I agree with you. Like, we don't want to do something that is going to, in the end, cost us more and cost our fees to be raised because it's more burdensome. But I just think, honestly, like I said, I think we have a tendency to get really worried about these things. We have another system that's working and working very well in our community. And I absolutely know that if we wanted to reach out to Roger and say, how do you do this without it becoming more burdensome? Absolutely, I know that he would want to share that. But this isn't theoretical. It's working and has been working for years. And Roger has talked about how it has made everything more efficient, not less efficient. So I really do think that there's no downside to this.
So I think we're in a good place.
Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing is well-founded arguments for and against, but no one is going to die on the hill of changing the policy outright. Agreed? So, number one. Number two, I think this is a great opportunity for an innovation of the automatic renewal. We're already doing it somewhere else in the county. Let's try it.
Yeah,
Are
absolutely.
we
I
on
didn't
board
know
with that?
they did that.
And just to see how it goes, and then would it look to you at 90 days and 180 days, report back on, if this does pass, how it's going?
Yeah, I would want Kat's input once she
Yeah.
does talk with the attorneys, if she talks to Roger Lovell, and if you feel comfortable doing this, that's one thing. If you think I don't want you to feel pressure like, hey, we have to do this, so I'm going to go along with it, but I know this is going to be a train wreck. I'd want you to tell us that this is going to be a train wreck, and just lay out why. Okay.
No, and I appreciate that. And actually, to Commissioner Geithner's point, in the last 4 years, we've done a lot to align with PPRBD because we work so closely with them and our permitting process aligns with them. And that was one of the roadblocks that we've had to issuing permits, is just the timing and the mechanisms. And so we have done a lot of work. There's still a lot of things that I clearly don't know that they do. So I'm happy to check into that and come back with some maybe a different proposal on that.
Okay. So, we're good? Okay, so, Lori, I think the consensus is keep it, add in the automatic renewal aligned with what we're doing in the other, the building.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
But I would just say, I mean, we need to hear back from Kat that she's comfortable with this and thinks it'll work
That's fair.
well. Not
Okay.
just, we have to do it because we
Yep.
said it today.
So you'll bring that to the May meeting?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so
Number 4?
the next item would be number 4, which is the cleaner licensing. So a lot of the same discussion. We do have a current program where we license those who clean OWTS systems. They pump them out, and then they transport the waste to an approved site. The only change that is being recommended in this element is that we do currently inspect the trucks that are used for this process, and we're proposing to eliminate that. We require them to tell us which trucks they have, but we are proposing eliminating inspecting those trucks. Again, it's a 2-year license, you meet certification requirements, and we have a list on the website.
Pat?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, it is important for us to be able to license these entities because they do transport human and raw sewage, and it is important to be able to do that. In the past, we've inspected them. It's a very quick inspection, but it's time-consuming to travel and get them scheduled and have their tank full to do that, which has provided very little value in the 12 years, again, I've been doing this. We've done one reinspection, and that was because hoses were duct taped, and there was a leak coming from that we were able to identify. So the inspection piece has not provided substantial value for us to continue doing that, and I have connected with Colorado Springs Utilities back in 2014 when this was, again, the inspection piece was in that rig. It was done because the person operating the FOG program at CSU didn't want to do the inspections and wanted us to do them. And by inspections, it meant measuring their tank for the volume calculation. The current operations over at FOGS is in support of us moving in this direction and simply aligning with other counties across the state of Colorado that just supports the cleaners taking an educational course, a national training course, and providing that to us as their demonstrated competency, and then we would just respond to complaints if we got any along those lines.
Go ahead.
So similar question, does this license, like the 2-year requirement, do they get the license from us? And then is the 2-year requirement, where does that come from? Is that ours? Is there, like, where is it?
Same as with respect to the installers. The state gives us the authority to license them, and then everything else is up to us.
So they're seeing less change in what they're doing than an installer does? Like their tanks are their tanks and like that's not changing, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I feel where you're going here, and so in that aspect, similarly to what the discussion we just had, I'm more than willing to look at how often that particular course changes and maybe aligning more with when the course changes from an educational perspective, and having some sort of automatic process in place for that as well.
Keeping it plus auto renewal. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to push back a little bit harder on this one and say, do we need a license in this case? I guess, even in the example that you gave of like, there's a truck and they're using duct tape. I mean, that's common sense in my opinion. I mean, I think anyone knows like, leaking sewage places is bad. I guess I feel like I would want to understand a bit more maybe from your perspective on what are these groundbreaking things that they need to learn in this that are, not more common sense, I guess. And to the point of like, yes, how often are these changing? Because again, I'm thinking like handling wastewater, probably the necessary caution there is important, very important, but also it doesn't seem like it's probably changing that much. So could you even give an estimate of what you think and what kind of changes are we talking about if there are changes? Because I'm going to be honest with you. Here's the thing. People make money with certifications and classes. And even when we're getting feedback from the industry, and we do the same thing with developers or whatever, we always have to weigh that against, some certification or some test maker thinks, well, we're going to change something every 2 years, so that way we can make an excuse for why we need to sell our tests to people and get these things done. So I'm very sensitive to how industry actually lobbies for their own benefit in many ways. We all know this, right? This is not like new stuff. And so I just want to think through, is it really necessary, or is it just something that comes out and you would know better than I do what those kind of components might be. And in this case, I feel like this is, in my mind, and happy to hear from others, but the questions of what Todd was asking, when something's really technical or there's something very specific, okay, I can, again, be much more open to that. And I didn't say it before Dr. Collins goes. I guess I'm going to retract my statement that I generally dislike licenses. I do, but also there are obviously some fields, the medical field being one of them, that I probably would not recommend we get away from licensure. But something that is very non-technical seems to me someone who's going out and pumping a septic tank and that type of thing is probably not a super technical. And so do we really need even a license on that? Or is that something, it makes me crazy that people have to get a license to cut hair. It's ridiculous. They're not going to hurt anybody. But, so I'm just thinking through, do we really need a license for this? Or is it just another hoop? And I understand. We could say, it's only one day. Man, if I could get back a day, this is what happens with governments. And death by 1,000 cuts. It's only one day here and one day there and $10 here and $150 here. And before you know it, we have a state where businesses are leaving. I just don't want to contribute to that in any way more than we absolutely need to and what is necessary. So do we need a license on this particular thing at all?
And do you keep a similar list? Okay.
Yeah, so there is a list maintained of system cleaners. And I think the biggest concern is the fact that they don't just haul wastewater. They haul a variety of things, including grease traps and oil and different things. And so understanding what they're hauling, what they can and cannot do with that is a huge aspect of that. This particular course, to your point, does not change often, and so we would see a longer time period between that. I don't have specific dates on when the course was done and when it was last changed off the top of my head, but I can look into that. And another big problem that we do see and we routinely get calls about is land application of sewage. And so that is a huge aspect of that. There is permitting requirements for that. You can land apply sewage. However, that is all done through CDPHE and not through us. But the aspect of this and making sure that we are appropriately treating and moving sewage the right way and not combining it with unnecessary things and making sure we keep separate things, that's an educational thing that does need to happen for people who are doing this work. They also make repairs to systems in like unpermitted repairs. So they will add tees to tanks or baffles or risers and things like that. And then those are things that they should be aware of and what needs to happen and what does and doesn't apply in our rig.
Is there a way to, even if we applied that same thing, but maybe we make it like a 5-year? And I'd be honest, if there wasn't any major change, I'd be like, can we just waive it this time around for people if there's no major change? Like, how do we make it as easy as possible? Yeah. But also, do we have any... or have we thought through, could we do almost like a train the trainer, in that, if a business comes in and gets a specific level and has one person certified, that they can now just go back and train their own people in-house?
Well, and that is part of the change here too, is currently right now, we inspect every single truck in their fleet, which the initial truck is $232 and each additional truck, I believe, is $99, if done at the same time. And so part of this change would be a single license applied to all the fleets in the truck. And so it would only apply similarly to the licensed contractor, where one person has to have it and their employees can work under it.
Okay.
That would be how this, and that was part of the change too,
Okay.
is to get away from individual truck aspects of that and move it to education being where it needs to be, and then the responsibility being on the company to educate their employees.
Okay, that's definitely an improvement. I'd say,
Yeah.
Again, I just feel as if we don't have licenses in about a billion other places. I get that this is serious, but you even said but we get calls about land application all the time. Okay, well then the license obviously isn't preventing that. So I think I am much more comfortable working on complaint-based and enforcement rather than that overly we can have this discussion about, yes, of course, I think prevention is a good thing, but I would prefer that through education and do enforcement. But if we're going to go down this road, then I would say, can we make it like 5 years or something? Yeah, and with
Yes.
5 years, but with an auto renewal, because things are not changing as much.
Go ahead,
But
Mayor
I'd still
Dixon.
say we don't need it.
Is there a way to verify the trucks and the hoses don't leak? Do they, is that a self-certification, or is that something they have to video, or, yeah?
I think we can incorporate that into so the way it's written in now is that they would have to take the national training course. And then we could incorporate potentially an affidavit that says, we affirm our trucks are, not leaking and in good repair.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is because back on PPACG, there was an issue with the big, I think it was Seven Falls or something like that. And the biggest concern was the trucks transporting through the community. And
Do
so
they
that's
transfer
why-
hazardous materials?
Raw sewage, so yes.
So, okay, sorry. Anything other than raw sewage?
Raw sewage, generally fats, oils, and greases, and then, yeah, that's about it.
But like
That's-
chemicals or?
No, that would
No,
be under
okay.
a different,
Totally different?
Yeah,
Okay,
outside
okay.
of us.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. That's just what popped into my head was that big concern that the community had with the transportation of the sewage through the community. And, oh my gosh, what happens if someone hits the truck or has a wreck? And
Yeah.
But I think at a minimum, an affidavit saying, hey, you need to make sure your trucks and hoses don't leak.
Dr. Chan?
How frequently were you inspecting the trucks before?
they were required to be inspected annually.
And in 12 years, you only found one infraction?
Correct.
Okay. Well, that answers that question. I think that I'm much more aligned with Commissioner Geithner. I do still think that people need to be licensed, but I don't think that the program needs to be especially onerous. I also think that anybody can pass an open book test, hopefully. And some of the updates in the training, I can't see that it's going to change that much, but I do think that for the trucks as well as the installers, the real test comes to performance in the field. And I would guess that your division knows who is performing well and who is frequently failing in both those aspects. And so I do think that moving to a regional development model where the people who have been always performing well should have an easier time or less frequent renewal.
Yeah. So I think,
If I,
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Thanks, Mr. President. So one of the things that is on here, Kat, is under key points, is that we're during the inspection. And so inspecting the vehicles, this is your recommendation. Stop doing that. You're not all about let's be as onerous as we can or anything. But what is it that gets licensed under the cleaner licensing?
It's their ability to operate within El Paso County to haul sewage within their trucks.
The individual driver,
The company.
the company?
Moving to this model would be the company as a whole instead of individual trucks, where what we have right now is inspections of individual
Okay.
trucks.
And so it would be an annual license for the company, currently, is the way we're doing it?
Currently,
Is
yeah.
what your initial recommendation?
Actually, in the reg, we wrote it in as a 2-year to align with all of our other certifications, but we're going to go back and review that for the potential of extended or automatic renewals.
How many of these companies are there?
There are currently, I think, there are over 120 trucks that we
Well,
currently do. Very few of them have multiple trucks, so, but when they do, it's 10 plus. So I don't have that off the top of my head.
And the fact that they do, carry raw sewage sometimes and then the fog other times, I would ask you just to double check with CSU if they have any concerns if we go away from licensing, about what's going to end up getting dumped into the CSU processing. You know what I mean, where they take the raw sewage. But it says requires submission of national training certification. Is that for the driver or for the company?
So this would operate the same way the contractor license does, is whoever within the company goes through the certification process, they would submit that to us, so it would be for the company, and then they would be responsible for training the rest of their employees or trucks in that, within that company.
And how long is the licensing which we license now? What is it they have to do to get that license from public health?
Right now, it's the inspection. Their trucks just have to be annually inspected.
So if we take that away, what's left of the license?
Without the inspection. So we're proposing to remove the inspection and add the training course, which is something that the national company can provide much more information and much more training than what we can do. So it would just be the training, and then they would train their fleet.
They would submit proof that
Yeah,
their
that they
drivers...
took and passed the training course.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's it. They just have to provide documentation from their drivers.
Yep, and there are 73 active companies in the county currently.
And just to be clear, not from the drivers, from the responsible party in the company. One person in the company would have to take and pass the course.
And then we're just, what's the requirement for the drivers?
The requirement would be one person takes and passes the course, and then they're responsible for training the drivers, and the drivers would have to meet that and all the requirements of the regulations under that one certification, which is what we do with licensed contractors. So only one person is required to take the licensing exam, and then they're responsible for their employees.
Okay. And right now, the recommendation, we may change it, is every 2 years.
Yes.
And-
Go ahead.
Well, if I could, my final one would be, what do you think? Is every 2 years the right interval, or could it be farther apart and no harm done, or is there a reason to keep it at 2?
To be completely fair, this is one of those areas that kind of was just this is how we've always done it, and I didn't know that there were other systems that existed, so I do think that it's worth exploring and
Okay.
identifying what that interval, what the best ideal interval is.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
I want to just clarify, currently you're inspecting the trucks. What training are the drivers getting now?
I'm
Okay.
not
So
aware of
there
any.
is no current training of the drivers. There is no current licensing of these companies outside of this truck inspection. That's the current. So I guess what I want to ask you is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? If we're taking something away, which I really appreciate, because we're saying for 12 years we've been inspecting these things and we really don't have any problems, so we're going to take this away. But we're also adding this licensing component. So to me, there needs to be a problem that we're trying to solve, or we're just adding something because we're taking something else away and we don't feel like we want to, take something away, is what it feels like. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve?
Sure. So really, the educational piece of that and the understanding of what they're hauling, what they're doing, and where they're operating. To, I believe it was Councilman Donaldson's point earlier, the stuff that is being taken to the utilities is high-strength waste, and that does impact the utilities. And so they do need to understand that. And there is an aspect of, when you open that tank, and depending on what you're looking at, there are things within that tank that you can identify that may or may not be but may not be able to be transported to the CSU facility, and it may have to go somewhere else. And we have a septage crisis in this state as a whole, meaning there aren't many places for septage to be accepted. We are lucky here in El Paso County that we have at least 2 places that will accept septage. And I do think we do get lots of calls on land application. And to your point earlier, that what we're doing now isn't stopping that, and that's because there is no education and no connection, because we're only inspecting them to ensure their trucks are in good repair. we're not, so the problem is that people are land applying, that they're storing this in above-ground tanks on their property, that then we don't know where that's going. Or I have also received complaints of contractors dumping into sewer drains and sewer storm systems on their lots.
Okay, that's exactly what I'm looking
Yep.
for. So those are really the problems that are existing today
Correct.
that you are trying to solve for with this license. And these are not facetious questions, but
No.
because it's a reality. Is it truly that these people don't know any better, or is it lazy and cheap business practices?
I don't know if I can answer that explicitly, but I think it can be a combination. I do think there is a huge lack of education in the system cleaner aspect of it.
Okay, and so, do you know how many of those type of enforcement or complaints that we have received?
I don't have information for
I
that.
would love to know that number, because here's the thing, if we're gonna put this in place, we need to put it in place, and then we need to look at whether those are going down. And that would be the justification for the licensure, in my opinion. So I really appreciate you working through that exercise with me, because that is a good reason that I can get behind, is to try to stop that. But I wanna make sure that, like I said, if it's just bad actors who they don't care what it is, and they're just dumping because it's convenient for them, or it's cheaper, which, I mean, I hate to say it, but that is the reality that we see sometimes. I would just want to track what that number is and see whether this program is actually affecting the actual problem that we're trying to
Yeah,
solve.
so I think this is a fairly substantial change from current state. So like with the previous one, would expect you to come back 3 months, 6 months, and let us know how it's going. Plus, anything, go ahead.
I can tell you for CSU in the city, E. coli in Fountain Creek is a problem, and we know there are instances where dumping occurs into, really we should call it like stormwater, because when you say sewer drain, people think, oh, it's a sewer, but it's just where water from the roads is supposed to flow. And so if, again, I would ask you to check in with them. I mean, I'll try to remember to do it myself, but I think there's potentially a benefit there where we can reduce dumping into infrastructure like the drains.
Okay. So,
Okay, so let me ask, with the instances, for example, where you saw serious infractions, such as emptying a tank into the storm drain, was that person licensed, and did you withdraw that license?
So we don't currently license them. We only inspect their trucks. So we would not have pulled a license because none exists.
Okay, so I think that this is an opportunity to make sure that, I mean, if people are licensed and customers are more likely to call a licensed septic pumper, that if there are infractions found and they then lose their license, that may be an added incentive for people to actually behave in a reasonable and responsible manner. Because I think that if you stop inspecting trucks and there is no licensure, you are going to get a certain number of Joe Blows who put a tank on their pickup truck, pump out somebody's septic or whatever, and then drive to a remote area and dump it. That's just human behavior. And so I do think that there is a role for public health to try to minimize that aspect of human behavior.
go ahead.
Okay, so thank you for the clarification. I actually agree in that you have sold me here, so great job. That I know. But that is the biggest reason, because the inspection wasn't stopping that and we had no way to stop it. But if we have bad actors, we want to stop them. And pulling their license and saying you can no longer do it is a great way to stop them, and I appreciate that. But I am interested on the enforcement mechanism too, because I think what Dr. Chan described, those people aren't going to follow and get a license anyway. They'll just do it. So that becomes an enforcement issue. And so I don't know if enforcement of those type of things falls under here as well. And do we have the strength in those for those circumstances? Do we feel like we have the tools in place for those circumstances? Because I just think, I don't disagree with Dr. Chan that people may do that, but I think those are also the kind of people who, even if we have a licensure program, aren't coming in for it. So that's a whole different ball of wax. I would think that would be criminal.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say,
There's
is
already-
it licensure or is it actually fines? Like, if you're caught doing this, you get a fine, a hefty
Yeah.
fine. And so is it really licensure that we
I
should
think
be?
it should be
not-
both.
Okay.
I mean, I
But
really do, because in this case, and this is an interesting conversation, because we've talked about this on various other negative activities around town, but when it becomes hard, it's like you've got a truck and you catch them once doing it. But then who's walking around, really being able to see if they're actually doing it? And so they can go right back into business and just pay their fine. And sometimes it might be worth it to them if you can't get a super hefty fine. And the way that the state has been going, I don't know about the fines here, but most of our civil penalties have been gutted by the state. We're not allowed to charge anymore. I don't know if that's the case here.
So,
I think that Joe Blow with a truck is less likely to get customers if there is a well-established program that the public knows about for licensing responsible actors.
Yeah, and I'm not arguing that we shouldn't, to be clear. I'm just saying, do we have other penalties in place? Because even just again, there will be people who will ignore it, is my point.
So absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I will say though that I think that the department needs to concentrate on basic things and responding to complaints that come in. I'm constantly getting an earful from neighbors, et cetera, who have reported unpermitted outhouses, who've reported ongoing open defecation, especially near waterways, and individuals who have just redone their whole septic system right next to a stream and have not gotten a satisfactory response from the department. And so I think that we probably should try to take as much burden away from this kind of regulation, although putting in some minimum standards and then concentrating on those other, somewhat more serious complaints.
So, Lori, can we add a fine? I think that's where you're going next.
So enforcement is prescribed by the state. So violation of our regulation is a civil infraction, which is it's handled under the state criminal code, but it's a fine only. I'm not sure what the range is, but it's pretty low. So it's similar to an ordinance violation on the county side.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. They've lowered that over the years, right?
Yeah,
Am I
it used to
remembering
be
that
a
correctly?
misdemeanor, and then it became a petty offense, and now it's a civil infraction. So
So
that would be enforceable by the local law enforcement agency as civil infraction. Other enforcement options are not great. We can issue a cease and desist order for someone who's operating without a license. Then if they violate that, the only option is to take them to court and ask a court to enforce that cease and desist order. And that's just not a quick process. It's not an efficient process, but those are the two options available.
Okay. So there is something in place.
Yeah, but for that reason, I actually would agree that the license is very important, because otherwise we can't do anything. We
Right.
could, slap on the wrist, here's your $50, $100, whatever. I mean, it's so low. They can make so much more money by doing it. And so if we truly have a bad actor, right? Like, not someone who's just uneducated, but someone that we really, pulling a licensure and being able to go to court and say that they're operating without a license is our only recourse to actually get them to stop dumping sewage.
Okay. I think we got to a good place on this one. So I think the group is at, let's go with the proposed changes and add in the automatic license renewal and the longer license period. Okay. Okay.
Okay, we
We
have
have two more,
two more.
and it's 11:30, just
Yep.
so. Great discussion. Should we try to hammer it out in the next 30 minutes and see where we are? Okay, I think we have one more, quote, easy one.
I don't know
That was tongue in cheek. It's been 2 hours on our easy ones, Lori.
So we'll move to the one that's related and that would be new for us. And this is certification of OWTS designers. So if you're following along in your book, that would be on page 7 under tab 2. Staff is proposing to add a certification for those who design OWTS systems. It would not apply if you are a property owner designing your own conventional OWTS. Otherwise, you would be required to meet certain requirements in order to submit a design, whether it's conventional or whether it's engineered. And so it would be, if I can go, I'm happy to go through what those proposed requirements are, but they can be found in the regulation itself. If you want to take note, it would be tab 4, and it's pages 28 and 29 that talks about the certification process and what the requirements are. It's valid for 2 years, and the purpose is to make sure that folks are familiar with the design standards and with the soils standards in the regulation. I would also add that not only does this not apply to homeowners doing conventional OWTS, it also would not apply to a licensed systems contractor. So if you're licensed to install or repair, you don't need to be certified in order to actually design the system as well. But if you're not a homeowner and you're not a licensed installer, then you would be required to get this certification.
Okay, Kat?
Yeah.
And my initial question would be, why now? Why are we proposing this now? Why is this new?
Sure, I'm happy to add context to this because it is, and Commissioner Geithner and Commissioner Nelson can probably speak to this, that we routinely have to, or not have to, but there are concerns about our processing times and our turnaround times. And that's not a secret. It's been that way for a couple of years now. And we have tried numerous other ways to really move and align our industry members into understanding what this is. And so to the point of licensures and certifications, there is no academic track for professional design and OWTS. There is no professional engineer specialty, so like, professional engineer in aerospace, professional engineer in electrical, there is no designation specific to on-site wastewater treatment systems. However, they are one of the most impactful things to shared community resources in groundwater, and if not done properly, can have substantial impacts. There's studies out there that show norovirus, Hep A outbreaks from contaminated groundwater. E. coli, is a concern as well. Nitrites, those are all concerns. And so if they're not properly cited and properly designed, the impact is substantial. And so what we found is 2 years ago, we initiated a design revision fee to try to initiate or remediate some of these concerns that we're having. But so the concerns that we're having are, we are spending a substantial amount of time educating our industry members and through essentially hand-holding them to get to a point in the design that we can approve. There are about 2 engineers in this county who routinely submit work that 98% of what they turn in goes through on the first time. Everybody else is in the realm of 50-50. And again, I don't have hard numbers here because our system was not set up to track in this manner, so I can't provide you specific numbers. This is learned, lived experience, that we can extend to 6 to 8 weeks on turnaround times because we're going back and forth and we can't get the design right, or we can't get the design in compliance. And so that is an area where it's not necessarily for us to design the system or to educate on the design, but there are resources out there that are available to be able to do that. And soil science, and I think Mayor Dixon and I have had good conversation around the perceptivity of this industry and how that works. What I may read as a soil type 2, Mayor Dixon may read as a soil type 3. And so we have these huge substantial differences in perception that the only way to get some continuity and some consistency is through a training course. And while that may not be the ultimate resolution, it's a key step in that aspect. And so we initially tried a design revision fee, and what we found is that had very minimal impact because that only got passed down to the homeowner and became an unnecessary burden on the homeowner. And so, when we get out there, for example, just yesterday, my OWTS staff spent about 2.5 hours on a property with an engineer because there was identified groundwater that they could not identify, that they told us was from the recent rain events, which have
What rain?
been, yeah. That, and they identified this as a two-way soil, but we were able to pull, or my staff, not me, but my staff brought back huge cemented clumps of this material that was unaccounted for too. And so over the course of, again, the 12 years that I've been here, we've had many misidentified applications of soils, and it's not, I don't feel like it's our place to say, that's not the right soil, because we go through these training courses. So we have enough to identify, if you told me it's sand and I get out there and it's clay, like, we'll make that distinction. We're not going to delineate like a 2 to 2A, but there was one up in Cascade, Green Mountain Falls area on Mountain Avenue that sat open for over 3 years because, the engineer said it's sand. Everything in the Pikes Peak shadow is sand. I asked on the front end multiple times, are you sure? Are we sure that this is what this is? Yep, okay. So we accepted it, permitted it, get out to do the inspection, and it is fractured and deteriorated bedrock the entire way through. So the system went in not within the permitting requirements or the regulatory requirements requiring a sand filter, and it sat open for 3 years before we got to a resolution on that. And so that is an aspect of training that needs to occur, and there are very good training courses out there. And they have found success in this, particularly in Pueblo County has this requirement for to submit a design course certification and a soils course certification. And ultimately it comes down to, we spend so much time questioning designs that if they had the right training that was specific and specified, I could see a substantial downgrade in our time and ability, or the time we spend going back and forth with our design community. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the recommendation is to move forward with a certification of designers, because the other aspect of this is we don't have a list. We don't maintain a list because there's nothing to maintain a list of. We do get a lot of, my brother-in-law is a professional engineer, so he'll just do it. And that comes with a huge gap in understanding because this isn't the aspect that they work in every day. So much like nursing, lawyers, they're licensures, and there's professional certifications that come with that, and there's specialties within that. We're just looking to try to gain consistency so that we can move forward and effectively improve our turnaround times.
Okay. Mayor Dixon.
2 questions. Roughly 50% of the engineers you're working with are coming in with non-compliant systems. And if that's the case, how are we flagging that back to is there a way to flag that back to the state to say, hey, we got a problem here, because, okay, so the engineers I used to work with were very proud of that stamp. And anything that jeopardized that stamp, they took very seriously. Is there a way to flag this back to the state to say, hey, there's an issue here?
That because I'm assuming you mean Dora and through their stamp. So we do have one engineer who regularly submits and gets no less than 25 kickbacks in their initial design. And what I mean by 25 kickbacks is there are a list of 25 different things in that design that is not compliant with the regulations. They are currently under probation with DORA. We don't have a mechanism to report those at this point in time.
Okay, that's unfortunate, because it seems like there should be some kind of reporting mechanism for anyone using a stamp. And we're having to go back and say, we've had 25 issues here on a regular basis. And maybe that's a problem that we can't solve here, but it just sounds like it should be. And the second question is, if someone does have a designer certification, would it be considered then pretty much an automatic approval?
Yeah. Yeah, so that is our intent here, is if they were able to provide us with their passing design course and soils course, then that would prove to us or allow us to accept their designs. And so trying to really get away from those one-off designs, because here's the other problem that we routinely have is there are several, and by several I mean probably less than a handful that I am aware of that operate in El Paso County and other counties, where their father or a family member owns the stamp, and this contractor does all the work in the soils and the design and then uses family members' said stamp. And those are routinely the ones that we have a high number of issues with as well.
And there are people who sell signatures too. I had to deal with that, so.
Yeah.
So we'll do Commissioner Nelson, Dr. Chan, and then Commissioner Geithner.
So one of the things I've been wondering about, and it is very concerning to hear that 50% of what is being submitted isn't able to be accepted. And so I can see how requiring certification might be a solution, that it sort of helps level set everyone. Like, here are the requirements, here are the guidelines, here are the criteria, understanding, like a common understanding of soils and that sort of thing, like what you all identify as 2A versus what's being identified as 3A. I'm just making things up here. That it sort of level sets everyone and says, this is the agreed upon, we're all working from this base. So maybe certification is that solution. But one of the things I've been wondering is there an aspect to this work that we have expectations in our department that aren't well documented for designers to go and reference and say, we define 2A as X, or like, so there's that question that's in my mind. Is it also we could just do a better job of defining things and putting on paper what we expect? So there's that. And then I also just wonder how much we're getting into risk and liability of, we're not engineers ourselves, and we have people who are engineers, but I guess there's not a certification. So I don't know, I just worry that we're like telling people what to do, that we ourselves don't have that expertise. But I guess what you're saying is we don't have expertise in the engineers either, because they might be an engineer but not
Correct.
a geologist to understand soils or
Yep.
whatever. Okay.
Yeah, and to that point, there is a very different understanding of how effluent moves through soil than just soil science in general. They're two completely different things, and they do require awareness and knowledge and education of specific to effluent and how that moves through soil. I think to your point, and why we got to this point where we're requesting or proposing and asking for certification, is over the last 5 years, we have those annual meetings, we have biannual meetings for all of our sectors, and that includes engineers, where we ask them to come in twice a year for 2 hours, and we go through and talk about, like, where are we not aligned, how do we align, what's the intended application, and how are we going to apply this, so that they are aware. And it's still not moving the needle to the point to be able to get us to process our applications and turn them around much quicker, and be able to work through those aspects of where the gaps are.
Dr. Chan?
What is different about the two engineers that get a 98% first-time pass?
They are well educated in the science of on-site wastewater treatment systems. They have both of these certification for the design course and the soils aspect. and this is what they do, one of their primary focuses. So they're not, I don't know what their PE stamp specialization is, but for what they do is mainly in on-site wastewater treatment systems.
Okay, so regarding the certification, what you're saying is that you want all designers to take this course, and if they pass the course, then they will be certified. And then once they're certified, then you no longer will inspect. What is it that you won't be inspecting?
It's not that we won't be inspecting, because we still have an obligation under the permit to complete and conduct the inspection. What we're saying is that if you've taken these courses and passed them and submitted them, we will accept your designs for review. So we're proposing to not accept designs from engineers who do not have training in on-site wastewater treatment systems.
Okay, so why would they need to be certified if your requirement, if you're thinking that the first time review or spending way less time having to go back and forth will result from this training course, why wouldn't you just say anybody who submits a design has had to pass this training course?
That is what we're saying. And that's why it's termed a certification and not a license.
Okay,
So-
Yeah.
okay.
And
Okay,
it does
all
not
right.
apply, so keep me honest, does not apply to homeowners designing their own conventional systems.
Correct.
That's in black and white. But you also said it doesn't apply to anyone who has one of the previous licensures that we just.
To the licensed contractor
The-
for conventional
right,
systems, yeah.
the number 3.
Yep.
Okay. So in the Venn diagram, what percent does this cover of the outstanding total pie, if you will? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. So right now, where we're at, we have about a 65 to 45, or 65-35, sorry, ratio of conventional designs or engineered designs at 65% of what we get, and 35% is conventional. So we see a higher number of engineered designs, and that's where we're seeing higher levels of discrepancy in design parameters and understanding of the regulations.
I see. Okay, thank you.
So
Commissioner-
this is on just engineered designs? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
jumped.
So
certification?
It's two different ones. So, well, no, it's not two different ones, but you're correct. So the engineers would be the ones subject to
A certification.
soils course and design course, because they talk about the higher level aspects in those. They do talk about some of the gravity fed ones, but through licensure for systems systems contractors, so installers and homeowners, they don't need those higher technical aspects most of the time for the conventional piece of that. So installers would not be able to submit an engineered design under this. It would still be engineered designs or engineers, conventional systems or anybody, including engineers.
So I want to be clear that for conventional systems, this would not apply to homeowners and licensed installers.
Yeah.
Anyone else who wants to design a conventional system would have to get this certification,
Or an engineered system.
or any engineered system, yes.
So it opens up the ability for more people to become specific designers to conventional systems as well.
Yeah.
So if I knew nothing about on-site wastewater treatment system, I'm like, oh, I want to go design them. I take these 2 courses, now I can design a conventional system. So it opens up that, where right now it's not open to that either. So they do have to be licensed installers right now or homeowners. So we are opening up the education aspect.
Hold on, Doctor, hold on. So we'll go to Commissioner Geithner, and then we can follow up with you, Dr. Chan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, going back to my philosophy as a policymaker here and thinking about the problems that we're trying to solve, and I appreciate that you shared around the permitting, and for those who have not been around or heard this, yes, for the, 5.5 years, I guess, that I have now been a commissioner, environmental health. We've had this conversation, so this is not news to anybody in this room, but it's probably the thing that I've gotten the most complaints about from public health, right? I think we all know that, and we all are really excited about the movement that we're making, and I know it's not easy. However, I am concerned that we are not solving the problem with the right tool. And then we're cat 2 carry 0 here, so I really enjoy this.
Wait, is the recording still on? Did we catch that clearly?
And that is, I really appreciate it because I really, it means a lot to me to push really hard and get really good answers. I'm totally happy to be wrong or have not, gotten there and then get there and change my mind. I really, truly am. So I love this. But this is what I'm concerned about with this one. I hear you saying we want to get those turnaround times down. But the thing is, we do have low turnaround times for those people who are doing it right. So I don't want it to be about, we're just trying to hit a metric, and so we're putting this into place. So that's a little bit of what I'm seeing. And to your point around, admittedly saying, we don't really have the data on this because we haven't had the system to do this yet, but this is what I think we need. I'm concerned that this is one that we should take a break and say, hold on, maybe we need to look at the entire system and we need to have these tracking mechanisms. I know we have to do this 43 thing, but I'm wondering if now's the right time on this, or if we need to do some of that additional work first before we can truly get to justifying this. And then again, my philosophy that I think hopefully has come through is, we've got some people who are doing a good job. I do not want to make them jump through any more hoops. There is nothing more annoying than doing the work that you need to do, doing a good job, and then being put onto a remedial plan because your neighbor didn't do the right thing. And so I want to reduce that frustration for those people. So again, I'm looking back at, these guys are going to pay the money, and I get it that maybe homeowners, but again, those are decisions that they're making in those situations. So trying to think through, how do we let the market sort this out? Is there truly, because whereas in another situation, we might actually have a public health issue if we can't stop these people through having a license, being able to go through the courts or something like that. In this case, they can't build it until they get the permit. So really, is there a public health reason outside of, we think this would make the process flow through better? Because again, this is one where I go, can we do an incentive? Is there a way to say, look, designer, you've now been through 25 reviews on this. And we think that the reason is because you need to go and you need to take this course. Now, I hear everything that you're saying, and again, both being in regional building and looking at our land use processes, I can also say this to be true. There will always be bad actors. So I find if we have good ways to deal with those, but I don't want to design the system for the lowest common denominator, they're not going to get better. They're not. They're going to keep doing this crap. And so the fees may be the best way to do it, but I'm not sure that the licensing is as far as I want to go on this one without a public. So if you can come up with one of those great examples, maybe Lori can chime in and explain how we won't be able to do something great. But this one, again, I'm going, they are an engineer, they have their own responsibilities. Again, can we provide some level of incentive that is, hey, take this, or at the very least, let's have something and say, you don't ever have to do this again as long as you don't cause a problem. I mean, honestly, I'd be like, lifetime license, lifetime, you've been trained. Like, it's a one-time thing unless you start having problems. Because quite frankly, even in the situations that we were talking about before, we have new education. Again, it's like, well, I can still send out education. A good company is going to be doing that anyway. And so again, how do we reward those people and say, as long as you don't create a problem, you don't need to come in and have us babysit you.
Sure, and I can appreciate that, and I'm going to take a moment, the 2-0.
I know.
It's rough.
Collect your thoughts.
But I do appreciate it, and I do appreciate also being challenged because it helps us get to a better place. And so this is one of the areas that we, talked about. We've done X, Y, and Z up till this point, and it hasn't worked. And so this was our next thought process. Those two engineers who do get it right, their permits are also actually delayed because we're spending so much time on the order of operations. And so as permits come in, we deal with them on the order in which they are received, right? And so those permits still end up substantially delayed because of the other aspect of that. And so, a concern of ours too is we don't want to get into this idea of favoritism or, oh, you're only doing this because you don't like me. And we've had complaints about that in the past as well. And so that is a concern. But I hear you, and I'm happy to, look at how can we obtain more data here and maybe incentivize that and find a metric similar to, like the licensed installers. If you only get one reinspection a year, you can have an automatic renewal. Or if we don't kick back more than 5 of your designs in a year, then, if we kick back 5 or more, then we're going to ask you to take this course. And if that's something that we can look at writing it into the regulations that way instead of applicable to the entirety, and then gather data on what that looks like to be able then to move to the entirety, I'm happy to explore that as well.
Yeah, because I'm even thinking, like, again, to get really creative around this, it could be, in hearing the problem that you brought up about, like, it could delay the good actors. Like, we obviously don't want that, so I appreciate you bringing that up. But it may be, hey, by the way, after your second one, we're going to require you to take this course before you do your next submission, which is not necessarily the same as and I don't know how we could necessarily do that, but, like, the magic could happen, and that could be a requirement. Or I think it could also be, if you have not taken this and you get to this many submissions, by the way, you get to the end of the pile, and we'll take care of everyone else first. Like, find creative ways to make it hard for them to not make that choice, which means, by the way, if you want to be stubborn and continue to not make it the good choices, that's fine. We're not going to let you affect the rest of the people who are trying to do this work well. So just, like, again, more creativity around that versus everybody has to go through this hoop now because we have some people who aren't. That's all I'm really focused on.
One other proposal. Could this be the one where we try it as optional? Potentially. We say it's optional. You create whatever the original intent, while also gathering the data, getting creative, seeing the impact that the optionality has that we discussed with the previous 2 optional programs, and report back.
So I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying, is that we don't write this into the regulation at all, and we make it an optional thing for the designers at this point, and work to create the database for that.
So yes, you'll have to let me know what is the proper way. I had assumed you do have to include it, but it's optional, or does that not make any sense?
This is, the certification is an optional piece that we're voting on. So instead of making it mandatory, I think what Commissioner Geithner was getting at was, instead of making it mandatory, using it at, like, creating an incentive mechanism so that the people who are doing a good job, and this is their focus, we don't put a new burden on them, but
Okay,
the people who are coming back repeatedly, then maybe there is a threshold of, like, look, you have too many problems. If you want to come back, you're going to have to get certified. And then maybe at that point, it is a similar, like, once you're certified, you're good until you have problems again, and then we're going to send you back. But I do think, having that optional piece and using it more as a motivation mechanism for the people who can't get it right, and not putting a burden on the people who are.
So would we need to adopt something to that effect? Or are we saying this is purely administrative and you're going to go run with it and report back on how it's going?
I would have to defer to Lori on this, but I think if we're going to use it in that way of, if we have 2 kickbacks within a year, you have to take this course, I do think we'd have to write something into the regulation in order to do that.
Agreed.
Okay, I'm seeing everyone's head. Are we going to say something? I was going to say, I think we're all aligned with that.
And we can also come back with options. I mean, we can say, here's what it looks like if we go this route. Here's some language if we go this route. We can do that as well.
I have a question here.
Go ahead.
Do you know, of the people who are failing, say, 50% of the time or more, do you know whether they've taken this course or not?
I don't know that I could honestly say that for the majority of them, no.
Okay, so you're proposing this as a solution, but you don't know that it's the solution because you don't know if these people have already taken and passed the course and are still submitting crappy plans.
Sure. I hear you. In the conversations that I have had with some of our more frequent designers and installers, like I said, I can't speak for the majority. The two who routinely submit good work, I do know have these courses and have taken them. The others are more of the, I don't have to, so I'm not going to. For the ones
Okay,
that I
so-
do know, but I don't
But
talk,
you-
I don't have a regular conversation with all of them.
So you don't, do you know? I mean, did they tell you I don't have to, so I didn't? Or did you just not have that conversation?
No, yes, I've been blatantly told that I don't have to, so I'm not going to. Yes, I have been told that. The ones who routinely submit and do that, like the two good ones, they attend most of the Colorado professional and on-site wastewater treatments. The ones who are struggling, I don't see them at those trainings. I don't see them attending those courses. And I'm there frequently because I'm the president of that board right now. So I am in attendance of those and have been for the last 4 years. And generally, the two that get it right are the two that generally and regularly attend all of the training courses.
Okay, so I would support the recommendation that is on the table, which is that that you only require this training course if somebody is demonstrating failure. And I wouldn't put it at a specific number, like 2 fails during a year, because I think that it should be a proportion, because if somebody is submitting 100 designs and fails twice, they're probably doing better than somebody who submits 20 designs and fails one.
This is Laura. I just want to jump in and say that I don't disagree with that. I do recommend that the board, if we go this route, adopt some kind of metric. I do not recommend that you leave it in staff's hands to just say, whoever's not doing a good job has to take this course. That just sets them up for failure and sets us up for legal liability.
Okay. Commissioner Nelson, did you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, just to add really quick onto that, it could just be, X percent of your submittals in a year, then you're going to be diverted over.
But then you would also need to make sure that if they only have 2 submittals and only 1, right, that would be a 50% failure rate. So just think about that as you're writing the options, and I know you guys can handle that.
Yeah. So I guess my question still comes back to, it seems to me, and this is based on a recent example, which one that I got pulled in. I feel like it maybe could be a good case study, and there's 2 sides to every story, but from what I have heard, it seems to me that there was just also a difference of opinion in definition or requirements for a system to function, and the amount of sand that I learned a lot more about septics now, the amount of sand in the basal area and the definition of the basal area and the cap of the dirt on top of the sand and all the things. And so I still, I guess, have this nagging question in the back of my mind of, is part of it that we haven't clearly defined for people our expectations and requirements? And if an engineer is saying, no, this system is going to function just fine with less sand than what you're saying, then, I just am weary of us making that call, and like, who are we to make that call? But if the certification programs that it sounds like already exist sort of help level set and establish, this is what the Department of Health is operating from, and here is why we're saying it has to be XYZ, then, that to me would be a benefit. But I'm not sure if it's requiring people to take these certifications or if it's we just better define what we're expecting and the reason to it. So just putting that out there.
I just want to add on that a little bit, because I agree, and there are 2 things that are true here for me. We want things to improve in this department, and I know that you're very passionate about that and moving things forward, and that's fantastic. Also, what I'm cautious about is there's a reason why government typically moves slowly, and that's because We need to make incremental changes and not overreact either. And what I'm a little bit, and that's why I keep going back to like a light touch, let's start with the lightest touch. You start with the heavy touch, it's harder to back off. You've put a lot of work into it. Let's start with the light touch, gather the information, figure out, because I'm not sure that we've completely figured out all the problem sets, right? Like we need to get the data points together. We need to really fully understand that process. And maybe you do, and your gut will be completely right, but I do think that when we move forward incrementally and we have the data to back it up, it also makes a better case for the community. And just like you can convince me, we can also convince them of why we're doing it. So we could take a really huge leap forward and make things much more stringent. Not this is hugely, but you know what I'm saying? We could do the 2-year and we could come back with data and go, oh, it's working. But that may not have been the thing that worked. We might have been able to do a much lighter touch and made it work. And so let's think about that, as I think most of us are pretty much limited government people here. Let's figure out what the light touch is and see where we get, not overcorrect and go, well, we fixed it and we could have used a much lighter touch. That's where I'm at on this particular piece.
And I think that's where everyone is. So, Lori or Kat, are we clear on where we are currently? I know we've
Yeah.
kind of,
Nope, I
Gone
am
around.
clear on what the objective is for this, absolutely.
okay. 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 Go ahead.
Okay.
So the last one.
The last and the best. Okay. So the last one is the transfer of title program. We currently do have a transfer of title program, or as we're proposing to call it, a property sale program in effect, and it requires that before you sell your property, you have to have your system inspected to verify that it is functioning in accordance with its design. Public Health is proposing to add 5 exceptions to that requirement. And those are set forth, I think, in my memo. I can go over them right now if you'd like, but I'm not going to unless requested. Those are set forth in my memo under tab 1. Those exceptions, those inspections do occur from third parties. It's not public health staff conducting those inspections. And then there are minimum criteria that a system must meet in order to obtain what's called an acceptance document from public health. The results of those inspections are provided to public health, and they either issue an acceptance document to confirm that it appears it is functioning as intended, or they issue a notice of condition identifying those items that need attention. I think the biggest area of discussion that's, and there may be others, so I'm not trying to foreclose any discussion, but the biggest area of concern is how this fits into CDPHE's new requirements regarding cesspools, and the fact that cesspools, the installation of new cesspools is prohibited, the repair of cesspools is mostly prohibited unless certain circumstances apply, and how that ties into this process, because if a cesspool is identified through this process, whether it's functioning or not, it is required to be abandoned and replaced with a conventional system unless one of those other circumstances apply. Before I turn it over to start discussion, I'd like to just share something that I learned yesterday, because I've been arguing with Kat about it for 6 months. And I finally understood it yesterday. So A, I'm pretty excited about that. And B, it helps me understand what may be the value of adopting this program despite the fact that it has such an impact on cesspools. So whether the property sale process is adopted or not, the regulations still provide that if you have a cesspool, it has to be abandoned and it has to be replaced by a conventional system unless a conventional system will not fit on the site. Or, I'm sorry, conforming system, whether that's conventional or engineered. The regulations also require that if you do not have enough space for a conforming system, then you have to go to Section 8.10, which are the design criteria for soil treatment areas. You go to the repair section in there, and you apply sort of the step-by-step process to determine what you're able to do with that cesspool if a conforming system won't fit on that site. So I've always pushed back on CAT. I don't understand why the property sale process brings any benefit to those homeowners. Why would they not just sit on their cesspool until it comes to our attention because it's failing? Because outside of the property sale process, we're never going to hear about it unless it's failing. And now they need to replace it or fix it or do some work on it. I finally know the answer. And the answer is that my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that if the cesspool is failing, because a cesspool is just a pit in the ground, whether it could be an unlined pit in the ground, it could be a partially lined pit in the ground, it is failing because it's full, or it's failing because it's collapsed. But either way, it doesn't have capacity to accept anything more from the structure, and so it's failing in a state of failure. When that happens, under our regs, there's no way to fix that cesspool to create more capacity. So there's really no practical option other than replacing it with a conforming system or one of the other options identified in regulation. If it's identified through the property sale process, however, it's not necessarily failing, and there's still potentially capacity in that cesspool to accept more waste. If that's the case, and if your property won't accept a conforming system, you do have options to still have that element of the system and do something as simple as install a septic tank in front of it. What that is the septic tank then accepts all the sewage, it keeps the solids, the liquids, the effluent then goes into the cesspool, which still has capacity and is not failing. And so it's separated out that way, and then you pump out your septic tank, and the cesspool just infiltrates into the ground. I just wanted to share that, up to you whether that carries any weight, but I did not understand that for 6 months, and I didn't understand what the difference was between catching it earlier or catching it later, and that's what I learned. That's it.
Mayor Dixon.
So, question. If you catch it earlier on your own, those options are still available, correct? You don't have to have the transfer title program to identify it. If you say, someone up in my area says, hey, I want to try to do something different before it fails. I'm not selling my property. Are those options still available?
Yes, I would say provided we have a certified inspection that demonstrates that that is still functioning as
It's still
intended.
functioning.
So the connection is that this provides a certified inspection process.
Okay.
The driver is a point of sale, but that doesn't, you don't have to have a sale to get that inspected.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure I fully understood that piece.
Yep.
All right. So when we first started this process, I was like, there is no way I will be against this. I no longer feel that way. I am now fully against this. My perspective does not actually really come from the situation with the septic tanks in Green Mountain Falls. No offense, they're a small portion of the people affected by this program. And so for me, I took a very zoomed out approach, and Commissioner Geithner, I told her, I said, I'm not willing to make a decision based on one tiny percentage of the people if it's a negative impact to everybody else. So I've been, as I have learned more, which I just want to say, this is amazing. I love this so much. It's been so helpful. I know we've asked for a lot of information, and it's been repackaged and represented to us, but I feel like each step of the way, we gained a lot more knowledge, a lot more understanding, a lot more buy-in, honestly, on a lot of these things. Licenses, I was not necessarily excited about them, but I wasn't against them, and I felt very neutral. I love the discussion. I think we got to a great place. I'm struggling with this one because I do know I have two personal stories of friends who have bought properties. And one was years ago, which I thought, originally, oh man, if they had had the transfer title, this wouldn't have happened. Well, then I found out that the transfer of title happened 2 years before they bought their property, and it didn't protect them. So they bought a house, and it had a leach field that was on the fritz. The homeowner covered it up, passed the inspection, check, and then not long down the road, they ended up with tens of thousands of dollars of, there was a whole lot to it, but the point being, you mentioned it's a snapshot in time, right? So there's a system that looks great, and then it rains, and then it doesn't look great. So that snapshot in time really spoke to, oh, that's what they went through. This was covered up, the snapshot in time, it looked fine. It actually wasn't. And then I have another friend who bought a property recently in Black Forest. And I was like, let me ask you about buying your home and your septic system. And she was like, okay. So I asked them a whole bunch of questions about how did this work? Was it communicated? Because most inspections are initiated by the buyer. And then the buyer owns that information, and they get to negotiate what they want. And then they have the power, right? They understand, like, sometimes you buy things and you're like, that's not up to code, but I'm okay with it. And that's not up to code and I'm not okay with it, right? Sometimes you have that power as the buyer to negotiate that. When I found out this goes to the seller and it's on the seller, I was like, I don't actually love that, because then the seller can not disclose properly to the buyer. They can partially disclose. It puts them in the driver's seat, and I don't actually think that is a great way to do it. And then with this other situation with my, the recent purchase, they don't even know how to use the septic system, right? The education piece is really important, and the transfer of title really doesn't fix that. They had this inspection. They're not even confident someone actually came and physically looked at it. The box was checked, and they moved on. And she's like, I don't actually know. And I was like, oh, yeah, you need to go to the website and you need to look. There's resources. And if you need help, call me, because you can't just, like, she has a lot of kids, like me. We do lots of laundry in a day. And I was like, you can't just do that. And she had no clue. And so she was appreciative of that feedback, but there's no benefit to the buyer in this process when the information goes to the seller and the buyer is kind of flying blind. So as I've reflected on this and the fact that it's just like a point that is a common point, and for some people that's every 2 to 3 years. For some people it's 25 years. It's just a point that we can move towards. I don't know that this is the best. I don't know if this is really great. I think Deanne mentioned this when her and I were talking about other things and other departments, but she said this recently, that our services are the best, most effective when they're voluntary. And education is a big part of what public health does. And I just feel like this is one very specific situation that is opposite of that. And I know you weren't talking about this, but that's something that keeps ringing around in my head, is like, how can we do this better? How can we serve the community better? And I shared these stories with Hunter yesterday, and he was like, okay, with the two situations that you have, and they're just two, and that's even a smaller percent than the people who live in Green Mountain Falls, so it's just the two that I have. He said, what would be different if there wasn't a transfer of title? And in those two specific situations that I brought to him, I was like, nothing would have changed. The leach field still would have failed without them knowing it was in failure, and my other friend wouldn't know how to use the septic. This was not, a catch-all for all of that. So I think that my perspective is, how can we better educate the community? Because it doesn't matter if we check the systems or not. If they don't know how to use them, that's a huge thing. And could we not, going to an infectious disease, and they go and they do education with other medical professionals in the community. They go out and educate. So could we not do the same thing to our realtors? Their job is to protect the buyer. So could we not have more on the education, the more send a notice to Green Mountain Falls. Hey, this is happening. This isn't allowed. If it fails, we're going to have a really hard time. But if you'd like to proactively fix this ahead of time, like, let's do that. And then you don't have to do it during the sale of the house. And maybe they'll say, I'm just going to wait. And when I sell it, I'm going to do it then because I'll have extra money. But then it's on them and not on us. That's a whole lot of word salad that hopefully is helpful, but I am struggling with this one.
Who wants, yes.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you for sharing all that. So I too am struggling with this one. We had a different perspective going into this. I was very worried about the small percent, even if it would be a small percent. Not that I wanted to hurt everybody else, but I was kind of already of the mindset that I didn't think that it would hurt others and was worried that it might adversely impact even a small number of members of our community. And hearing all of those things, I agree with the education piece. It's like, instead of processing these, can we put that into, let's have some town meetings and say, hey, don't let it get to this point, guys, right? Like, how do we proactively do that? Because that helps people who even aren't selling, which I think that's actually really important for them. But I actually went and talked to a friend who's a realtor because this is not, I've not bought a home with the septic, so I didn't know what that process would look like. I know that Commissioner Nelson has. But I wanted to understand from a realtor's perspective what that process looks like, what it would be like if this process went away, would that create a concern, and what really that looked like. And what I came away with is, I think that, number one, sellers are required to fill out a disclosure, right, when they sell their home, and they're required to give that to a buyer. And in that, they're required by law to disclose any of those things, and it also talks about whether or not there's a septic system and what's going on there. So they're required by law to do that. Now, does that mean everyone's going to do it? No, but there is legal recourse if they don't, on the buyer or on the seller, because they're supposed to be disclosing all of those things by law. So I think that there's already some consumer protection built into that process. And then as I started talking to this realtor that I know, and he started saying, I would never recommend to anyone that they buy a house without that inspection. But that's not because the government is telling us to. And here's an example of where we do all kinds of inspections that are not required because it's good practice. And it was something that rattled around in my brain, so I'm really glad that he brought it up. When you buy any home, from your house to the sewer connection, you are responsible for. And that can also be tens of thousands of dollars that you are, could be responsible for. But we don't at Regional Building or anywhere else require these at the time of sale, just like we don't require a roof inspection. We don't require an electrical inspection. We do, again, ask in a disclosure that is required by law. If you've done any non-permitted work, you need to tell people. And so it's totally out of line with where we deal with other consumer-related things in relation to a home. If it was a public health issue that was purely, if we don't, if we don't do this, it's going to create an issue. But I really think that this one really is more about that consumer protection piece. And I just don't think that's the right space for us to do it in. I think we can work on educating and doing all of these things. But again, I think it's a workload that's not necessary. I think it's already happening. Guys, realtors make a pretty penny when they sell a house. That is their job and their responsibility. That's why they exist there. And I feel like we're duplicating what already exists in the market. And like I said, the realtors are already having these conversations with buyers. And so I really just think, like I said, I think it will continue. I don't think that we're going to see a huge drop off in it. I think that people will expect these inspections. Or maybe there's a point where the buyer discloses and says, I want you to know this is the reality. Here's what we've done. By the way, I even have here's my maintenance receipts on all the septic companies. You can call them and ask them. Now you don't need to pay $500, which I also thought it was very interesting that I've also heard, they can make the price whatever they want because now the government has mandated. Anytime the government gets involved and mandates something, companies all of a sudden can, they know that it has to be done and that you're in a hurry and all of these things. And again, it's on the buyer. This is a private contract between people in the community. So if we have educated and done our piece, I don't think it's right for the government necessarily to get involved in a way where we don't get involved in almost any other place in the home. So I too, and we'll see, because Kat's pretty good today.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I think it does bring harm to our folks in Green Mountain Falls. And I understand the concerns of what happens when something fails and all of those things, but we have enforcement mechanisms for if and when that does happen, and we can more proactively go out and have those conversations. And I think we can get to the same result with a lighter touch of government.
Mayor Dixon, then Dr. Chan.
Okay,
And then
and
Kat.
I will tell you, no matter what direction the board goes, I'm going to be trying to promote just that. Going
Yeah.
out to the public and saying, take care of this while you still have options, instead of waiting to when it fails and then you're out of options. You got to have this type of system, which may or may not fit, and then you may be back into the variance section and whatnot. So yeah, my biggest issue that I've had has been what I call the just because. I come from almost 30 years and, well, actually 23 years in the Fed and even years before that working, having to show compliance to the Fed. We had to pretty much have burden of proof for whatever we did, especially on something that already is up and flying. It was called an unsafe condition. And we had to have definitive items. Here's the unsafe condition. Here's how we mitigate the unsafe condition. And what we have not seen, in my opinion, is the data that says the cesspools are causing a health issue in El Paso County. I don't think we've been able to connect that dot. We have E. coli coming in Fountain Creek, but I can go up and show you all the geese up and around our lake, and probably half of it's coming from the geese up around our lake, and we have people that love the geese, and yeah, I mean, it's nasty. We have to hire someone to try to clean up after them. And so it's because of the fact that it's what I call it just because. Oh, you have one, you got to change it out. To me, it'd be similar to like the government coming in and saying, okay, you're not allowed to drive a Chevy anymore, you got to go drive a Ford.
Isn't the state requiring that? I'm confused. I thought the state has said cesspools are not allowed.
Nuance.
Yes, I can provide some context to this.
Yeah.
So this decision for cesspools to not be allowed was made well over 10 years ago. So in our statement of basis and purpose from Regulation 43, which is the appendix on the backside of the regulation, prior to 2017, a new installation of cesspools was already banned. And in fact, it is banned and illegal in all 50 states, as well as nationwide, nationally, worldwide. These systems are considered non-conforming, non-compliant systems because they operate in a disposal aspect versus a treatment aspect. So these systems, cesspools specifically, were cited to be installed into the groundwater table and or touching the groundwater table with the intent that the groundwater table would come into the system, infiltrate the system, and carry the waste with it. And that's a study out of the University of Minnesota that I'm happy to share if anybody would like light reading. But the state, not just the state, but all states within the United States have a ban on cesspools. That happened well over 10 plus years ago. In 2017, our 2018 regulation revision, which is currently in effect, is when they also said these now are no longer to be able to be repaired. So they can't be installed new, they can't be repaired. And so this is the phased-in approach to moving towards, because 2014 was really that substantial shift in that mindset of disposal versus treatment. And there is no treatment in these. There's so many studies out there that demonstrate that there is no treatment in these systems. So that's why you're going to find a lack of data, because as they become obsolete, they no longer become studied entities. So, and the impacts and a lot of the data and research that you are going to find is in the coastal type areas, but our water ends up in the coastal area. And there's bioaccumulation, and there's all kinds of things. And so I know everybody has comments, but while I have the mic, and to the point of it being a public health issue, like, while I certainly I hear your point, and I understand, the electrical inspections and the structure inspections, and those are things that solely impact that structure and that property. The difference here in the public health concern is that this impacts a shared community resource that doesn't just stay or is retained on this property. It is, and there's thousands of studies out there that demonstrate this, as well as even an overloaded septic system. There's one in particular that was responsible for a norovirus outbreak in a community because of an overloaded septic system that infiltrated the groundwater, and that then entered the drinking water supplies and the drinking water wells and caused an extensive norovirus outbreak. And so this isn't, yes, it's a component of the property and a component of the structure, but what leaves this system leaves the property. And that's what makes it a public health issue. And to the point of voluntary and educating, for 5 years now, have been in just about every realtor's office, every realtor's meeting. I give annually a continuing education course at PPAR. And we don't, PPAR, they get 5 people maybe at that, 5 realtors at that. So we do what we can. We even have open community meetings. We've tried that in the past too, and just to educate as a whole. Like our role and our want and our desire is to help the community and to support that, and not from a regulatory enforcement perspective, because that's not good for anybody when we have to come in and say, now you have 90 days and that's all you have and you have to get this done. Whereas in this case, what I think will be missing, and the gap in what the industry will provide and what we can provide, is the certification that occurs and the training class that occurs would implement higher restrictive requirements than if we are involved in this process. We can mitigate that and we can pull back on some of that. So, for example, the training course says you must label the system, or it uses acceptable and unacceptable in the terminology, and that's historically what they've used. They are working to revamp some of that, but they use acceptable and unacceptable. And if an inspector identifies a system as unacceptable, that property owner, that realtor would say, okay, we need to put a whole new system in here. I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt here, that we do have several inspectors that do that, and I guarantee you that probably 85% of what we push back on is not unacceptable. And so they may give you an inspection and it says everything's unacceptable or this is unacceptable, and now based on the national training, it says unacceptable, so I have to repair the whole thing. Where the service that we provide and going through us, we can identify what are the areas that are impacting, and does it truly need to be repaired or replaced. And I would love to give more people on septic systems education. How do we get them to come do that? How do we meet them where they're at? Because what we've done, and we have, tried this in so many ways, they don't show up. They don't come for that. And so, we do provide a lot of educational comments on that. And of course, that does mean that they have to get that. We also know that sometimes they don't get that. But what we offer is the ability to be more flexible in this. We can decide what gets repaired, what gets replaced, where we're going to draw that line, versus a truly national training course, which now, and I'm fighting this, and if we have a property sale program, we have the ability to kind of say, okay, we're going to engage with that or we're not. Whereas if you're going based on national standards and it being just an industry voluntary thing, they are now proposing that they do what they call a dry aggregate test, which means that they're going to be digging into people's systems, digging near and into, with the possibility of damaging the system. They're trying to saturate that area to demonstrate what, the long-term usability of that system. So there's some value to it. But I think at the end of the day, if we were to remove ourselves from this process, I don't think you're wrong. I do think some people would still opt to do inspections. I fear that it then becomes installers or inspectors who are doing this, telling the community that they have to do something, when in reality they don't. it might be something to benefit the system, but in reality, it's not impacting the true functionality of that. But if you take anything, and this is me just respectfully challenging in the same way you guys have challenged me, is this is a public health issue. And even though it doesn't seem like it, the stuff that we are putting back into the ground is leaving these properties and then being uptaked or pulled up through other drinking water wells, in even drinking water wells that are supplying our central drinking water system. And so while conceptually, and if you're just looking at it for what this says, I totally hear you. And if I didn't know better, I would probably think the same thing. But knowing better and understanding the impact, like I said, there's norovirus outbreaks, there's Hep A outbreaks, there's nitrate impacts and blue baby syndrome and all the things that happen with those that come from this infiltrating. And then not only does it get into our groundwater, but it then bioaccumulates in that aspect and becomes a bigger issue downstream.
Yeah, respectfully, I certainly don't want it to sound like I don't think that there's any impact. But I really appreciate this. I really, truly do. Here's the other side of this, though. There's always some level of risk. I can't stand that my neighbors use Roundup. There are constant contaminants that we don't regulate everything on. We just can't. And so we have to be thoughtful about what is acceptable and what's not. We're never going to get to completely clean. Listen, I filter my water like crazy, okay? I get it. I don't want to drink that stuff. I want us to be safe. You know, I think we're on the same page of truly wanting to protect people and understanding that all of these things do affect people. However, I will push back and say we have water systems that are connected in homes, electrical systems, they do impact each other. So there are other areas where it's impactful. But also, we're not saying, or at least I'm not saying, we should allow cesspools. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, currently, cesspools can, to your point, the government does not come in and say, we no longer allow that, take that out. They don't do that on anything. Probably wouldn't legally be able to, that would be my guess, okay? So what this is a way to trap people into doing it sooner than what we otherwise have a legal mechanism to do. And I have a problem with that. Because we don't do that in any other place. When you have codes, you build to the code, they increase. Yes, the other one may be inferior, but we still, we still understand, both from an economics perspective, we do better as we know better. These folks are in that position. They didn't put it in the ground intending to hurt anyone or any of those things, but it also may not be economical, and it may not be the right time for that. And so all I'm asking for is to allow the natural playing out of how it works in every other area, instead of the government finding another way to rope people into a net. And we deal with this in legislation at the state all the time. This is not the best example in the world, but I'm still going to use it because it's the only one that's coming to my brain. We had this whole thing with, we're no longer allowed to have separate bathrooms. We got to have, non-gender bathrooms or whatever it is, right? And this is in government buildings. Well, guess what? The way that they trigger that is anytime you go to update your bathrooms, now that comes into play, right? That's the trigger. So everyone tries to avoid these triggers. We just had a whole conversation about the International Fire Code and how we're all working so diligently not to trigger the energy code, right? So all of these triggers are built in. I don't like those triggers. I don't like the gotcha about it, and that's what I feel like it's doing for these residents. Understanding it's going to have to be addressed. I just don't want I don't want to put another trigger in place to be like, but we're going to get you sooner. It is an issue, but it's a small issue that is remaining, and that is going to be resolved over time. And on the education piece, boy, I hear you. We go to meetings all the time. People don't come in. They complain when it's not done. So I understand all of those things and how hard it is to change behaviors and change education. I still think that's our way forward on this. So I don't want it to sound like I'm unaware of or unconcerned by contaminants. But again, PFAS didn't exist until it did. all of these things and all of these risks that are constantly coming in that we're seeing new all the time and wanting to raise our standards, it's not a bad thing. We have to do it in a realistic manner that doesn't impact people in a way that is going to be incredibly negative. And that's all I'm looking out for here in this situation, is saying I want to encourage people faster, but I don't want to have that gotcha hook in there that's going to rope more people in faster. If that is the point of this program, then that's problematic. And if it's not the point, what is the point? Because I'm still not seeing the value in this program as a whole, and I'm firmly against it.
I have to go, so I'll just say that I think I am leaning towards not opting into this because I hear the concerns about health risk and spread to other property versus like a roof inspection is that individual property. I guess I lean towards maybe this needs to be more of a complaint-based attitude then, rather than through this mechanism, because if my neighbor's stuff is flowing into my property, we're going to notify the health department and then it gets acted upon, and not be through like property sales or consumer protection. And then just the point about, norovirus and E. coli, and I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but we don't really hear about that. Like, are we being notified of people's wells being contaminated with norovirus or E. coli? Like those aquifers are hundreds of feet deep, and so there's a lot of natural filtering that's happening there, and animals are going all over the place. Like I want to caution the fear there of that sort of thing, because if that really were happening, we would be hearing about it, and we don't hear about that. So that's not a reason to me why we should implement this program. And so I guess I'm leaning towards not, but I have to leave, and I will defer to whatever the board decides.
Which we will do next month, to be clear.
Okay.
And then
Well,
And
we're
then-
giving direction today, though, right?
Could I?
we do need to
could I-
provide some direction today. Dr. Jan, you've been patiently waiting. Go ahead.
Okay. I think that the argument that not requiring home inspections is a false equivalent really doesn't hold water, because there are things about homes that can affect public health in a much more significant way, in fact, historically, than the septic or cesspool issue. In Colorado Springs, one of the most concerning things is fire. And we do not require people to update their electrical panel or have safe wiring or make sure their gas lines are intact or their propane lines are intact or have defensible areas around their house. But if a fire happens, that entire neighborhood is going to be affected in a way that's much more significant than a septic overflow, in that the entire neighborhood's going to be burned down and the air quality of the entire county is going to be affected adversely. So I think that if we're going to be consistent, um, it would need to be sort of an all or nothing thing. Either we are concerned significantly for public health and regulate all of that, or regulate none of that. And I think that specifically for septic systems, one of the arguments is that 74% of people in Green Mountain Falls who changed title did not need to make changes in their septic system because it was within a family. Well, if your argument is that it's a public health hazard, then how is the hazard any less when the title changes to a family member? It's not that that family member is going to produce less hazardous waste than any other human on earth. So for me, this becomes an all or nothing proposition, and I would choose nothing. Initially, I would have been in favor of um, the title transfer inspection, But I don't think we need to mandate. I don't think we need to mandate that. Any realtor who is in it for the long haul wants repeat customers and they want references. So I think that a responsible realtor is going to advise their buyer to have the septic inspected whether it needs it or not. So I'm opposed to implementing this, and I think that we should opt out.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chan. Let's go to Vice President Salt, then Commissioner Geithner, and Mayor Dixon, if you had anything else to add.
I think I've pretty well said, I just have a fundamental problem with the burden of proof issue. And, you know, whether or not the government should be engaged in a real estate transaction, so.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm not questioning like the public health concern of failing systems. I'm completely grossed out by that. Like, that's just, it's a reality we live with, and those systems are going to fail whether they sell the property or not. Someone will live there for 25 years and never have the system checked, and they could have failure. And then you could buy a home, and a year later it could have a failure and have been checked. So I think that it's maybe going back to like the solution, like I come back to, this is just a random point in time that we can force it to happen. And I'm just not really in favor of that. And that's where I'm at with it. I don't question the public health thing. I think if we are not requiring it anymore, then we can tell realtors, look, it's your job now. And if you want to be lazy, then that's on you. But if you want to encourage your buyers to go get inspections, then sometimes people aren't worried about it because just like with the designers and like, well, I'm not required to, so I don't have to. The realtors say, I don't have to worry about it. You guys require it. I think we can shift the responsibility to a more appropriate party, and it doesn't change the issues happen at any point in time. It doesn't change the fact that there is a public health concern aspect of it, and it is incredibly gross. But it's about where is the proper role of government in this, and the forcing it in a certain moment in time because it's a convenient moment in time. I'm just concerned with the mechanism of it, and whether or not it's the best solution or if there are better ways that we can, again, even with the transfer of title, people still don't know how to use their system. So we're not really solving a lot of these problems. I think helping people with, the systems that are illegal, that's out of our control, we can inform and educate as much as possible. But I think moving the responsibility to the realtors, informing the buyers, and even maybe working with them and saying, like, look, this is the disclosure. I think it would be good for you to inform your buyer. This is what's happening. You're buying a non-traditional, like you're on a private waste system. You need to know these things. We encourage you to get an inspection, and then it's on the buyer, and then the buyer can negotiate what they want, and it's not necessarily a check. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you told us like we are not a legal mechanism, like we have no legal mechanism in the transfer of title.
We are not a legal part of the closing documentations.
Okay. So I'm sensitive to the fact that there is a public health concern here. I'm just concerned that this isn't actually solving the problem as effectively as we could, and it creates then unintentional consequences that I think we could just do better. And that's where I'm at.
Commissioner Geithner.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if there's any reason that we could not offer a voluntary service. To your point around sometimes, they're told by an inspector that a system is failing and needs to be replaced, and you guys can come in and say, well, not quite. Is there any reason that we could not offer that as a service to the public, a paid service, obviously, and then share that with realtors, which is if you want to have that inspection evaluated in a similar manner to what we're doing it, we do offer that service, but make it voluntary. Is there any reason we couldn't do that here?
Legally, no.
So just as a thought, we could still solve that problem, eliminate some of the other problems, maybe, and that maybe gets us to kind of a happy medium, because I actually agree with Dr. Chan. If it truly is a health issue, but we're allowing for some people, it's still a health issue. It does seem inconsistent. And I think we can get to the problems that we're trying to solve, that one in particular around, but what if they don't have to replace it? Like, we could still offer that as a voluntary service. And here's the thing, is we're talking about, well, maybe not all realtors know, and there's got to be some personal responsibility in this. We all know this, right? At some point, homeowners aren't just victims. You know, they're making decisions. They might go, oh gosh, I don't have to pay that $500 anymore. Okay, I'm going to take the risk. Good, fine, take that risk if you'd like. I want you to take that risk if you feel confident taking that risk. I think about this with my kids a little bit, and I don't want to see anyone suffer, but the reality is that's what a free society is. It's messy. And that's what I see in this case, is it's a bit messy. But I think about my kids and how I'm constantly like, I'm trying to hold their hands. I'm trying to get them to do all the things. And we just had this conversation in the break. And now I have an 18-year-old, and I, on a really big issue that could really impact his life, said, that's on you. He could have failed. And but that's his choice at this point. And I think about this with this homeowners. If they choose not to have an inspection, if they choose not to do the research, if they choose not to do all of those things, that is a part of what it means to be in a free society with limited government, and that's still a philosophy that I support. So if we can get to a voluntary program, that would be great too.
And would the recommendation in terms of I don't know if we want to call it a middle road, but some sort of extra support, the education piece, is that an administrative thing? Is that something we do differently? Or, again, this kind of goes back to my previous question when I asked something similar. Do we need to adopt something new here?
So it depends on specifically what you're talking about. If the approach is just education and whatever Kat does now about attending meetings and all that, you don't need anything in the regulation for that.
So where I think the remaining quorum is, at least, there's a majority, I think, that majority who don't support keeping this in. I think that's where we are. So that would be the direction to you, to staff, going into the next meeting. However, I think it would be worth, because we are missing some people, to bring in the view on the aspects we have been discussing, on if that is where we go, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do differently?
Sure, and so that would be my ultimate question, because I do hear you. So what I think I'm hearing is that you don't want it as a requirement in the regulation, but that doesn't mean that you're asking us to stop offering the service. Mm-hmm. Now, and mm-hmm. what I would challenge a little bit too is within the regulation itself, that gives us some flexibility in the amount of time that we have to, like if it's identified, we have some flexibility in how long it takes. So to a point that the mayor and I had a conversation about is, what is your plan for achieving compliance and, trying to get to that. So I think, and I can work with Lori about what this would look like, but what I'm hearing you guys say is it isn't a requirement in here, but we can still offer the service, because my concern of taking it all away completely and then you asking us to do all this education is there's no monetary support for that. And that then becomes a bigger, impact of, can we maintain and can we sustain this in order to do it effectively and efficiently if there's not, in the program where we can cost recover the work that we do, so that is my ultimate question is, you're not asking us to go away from it completely. You're just asking us not to have it as a regulatory requirement, but we could potentially, Lori and I can talk about what that looks like, is creating a minimum level of standards that is not regulatory required, but that we will apply to a voluntary process. Because that is what this offers, is like, here's the baseline standards that this has to meet, and that's what we review against.
Yeah, so that's what I was kind of thinking when I said voluntary, is that basically if you would like the public health to review, once you've gotten your inspection, and at that point I would say they're on their own to get their inspection, and then they could just kind of bring you the inspection and be like, what does this mean for me as a homeowner? And yes, I would want to see a fee associated with that. But that way, and, there may be a disclaimer in the beginning. If you bring us a fail, what could be failed, then you are submitting yourself to now, that process. And that allows that seller to be in control of that process. But I do think, honestly, I don't think we could offer it without some sort of fee. I think that would be unrealistic. And
There's a fee now, so
yeah,
that fee
right.
would
So
remain.
that's what I'm saying.
Keep
Like,
that. Okay.
is there any reason why, if it wasn't mandated through this program, that you could not institute a fee?
No.
Okay, so I think, whatever that would look like, I would just say, here's the service we offer, here's the fee for it, and then put that out there. And I would say, again, that's kind of secondary. I know that might be taking a little bit more time to build, so I would say my recommendation is that you come back with that removed from the regulation that as presented, but just keep working on that as a service to offer, that we're looking at trying to offer that.
I think that a program to educate both realtors, buyers, and sellers is a little bit further on down the road. I think that we probably are pretty close to deciding regarding whether to opt in or opt out of the title transfer program. But in terms of the program that's further down the road, you guys probably already know this, but CDPHE has very, very good resources on their website for both the lay public as well as professionals on specifically septic systems and cesspools. And I think that it would probably be good to somehow link that so that when people buy within El Paso County, they can easily access those resources.
Yeah, and you're already educating. I hope you don't think I thought you were just not. Like, I know everyone at Public Health is very proactive in the educating, and so that's where I think we can lean into it differently. So I think informing realtors that we're changing, it's still an option. We still have the fee, but you get to opt in. Then they're actually motivated to learn. So we might actually get better engagement because now they have to know. Because we're not doing it for them. So I think an optional program outside of the regulation, I think you're going to be able to come up with something really good.
Okay, absolutely. Heard everything. We'll work on that. And to Dr. Chan's point, all of the resources are already linked on our website to CDPHE.
Excellent. For next meeting, can we send a memo to the board as a summary of what we just decided? I know you're the red line, right? But if there's, just like what you did for today, exact same thing.
Yes,
Okay.
we would be happy
Okay.
to do that.
Okay, we made it. I'm going to award Kat the MVP of the meeting award unilaterally, and not to take away from
Can I
Deanne's
second that?
fantastic day she's having, but that was impressive. You're a rock star. Thank you for helping us. And I don't know what the scoreboard final is between you two, but no, I'm kidding. This was fantastic. Yes, 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 yes. Yeah. Yes. You took the words out of my mouth, so I'm not going to say it. But this is what it's all about. So thank you. Anything else before I adjourn? Okay, we are adjourned at 12:57. Thank you.